Welcome, brothers and sisters, to another episode of the Mormon Movie Reviews. I am your humble host, D-Bays, and yes, that is talent on loan from Kolob. I am the diddly whack Mac Mormon Daddy. I am the king of the Sons of Provo, and I am talent on loan from Kolob. This time, we're doing the Mormon Movie Reviews here, folks, with Where No Flag Burns. I can't tell you how important of a film this is for Latter-day Saints. This is 1969. This is the height of the Vietnam War protests. And the church, a couple years prior to this, founded the BYU Motion Picture Studio. And that's really what this film is based out of. It's a BYU officially produced film. So during the nationwide campus protests of the late 1960s and early 1970s, there was lots of protests that were happening throughout the country on college campuses, not only for the Vietnam War, but for feminism, for equal rights for women, for gay rights, for civil rights in particular. It was a massive time of great upheaval in the United States. And what this film is going to demonstrate is that BYU students, they quote, maintain their composure and conform to the standards of the church and the university rather than to the outside forces. So BYU went through zero protests. And that's where we get the title of this film, which is Where No Flag Burns, because at BYU, no protests were allowed for anything. And the BYU administration almost allows no protests for anything. They occasionally will allow protests, but it is definitely few and far between. So people talk about, why is it that the church is so far behind on social issues in so many aspects of church history and culture? And it's because they didn't reform, 70 years ago, like so many other institutions. They fought against the Civil Rights Act. They fought against the ERA. They fought against gay rights. They fought against trans rights. They fought all of these things tooth and nail. And BYU had a great deal of solidarity with incredibly racist and sexist institutions like Bob Jones University, and it filed amicus briefs in support of Bob Jones not allowing interracial marriage all the way up until the 70s. And of course, Bob Jones lost his tax exempt status for a period of time, and BYU was on the verge also during the same time frame. What we've learned from Matt Harris is that BYU was on the verge also of having run afoul of its tax exempt status, of the IRS, of possibly being kicked out of the Western Athletic Conference, and a number of other issues. And none of this was really forthcoming to the students, to the faculty members, or to the membership of the church at large. It was all hidden under a rug. And that's what you're going to see is this incredibly whitewashed and sanitized version of BYU's history. And it's that same kind of version that the church really puts forward in all of its propaganda materials during this time. And of course, it wants to close the chapter on this ugly part of BYU's history. And you will see in this particular video that there will not be one person of color on the entire campus. There will especially, well, I will put a caveat in there. There won't be an African, there won't be a Black American or an African American on this. There will be people from Fiji. There will be people from, the Polynesian Islands. There will be people of Hispanic descent, but you won't see any Black people in this particular film because BYU is forced kicking and screaming to the table to admit Black persons and Black faculty members. I don't believe it was until 1970 until BYU hired a Black faculty member. So you had an entire university here that is really white supremacist to the core. Go back to the teachings of Brigham Young. Brigham Young was a white supremacist through and through. He interpreted the Curse of Cain and he solidified racism and sexism, homophobia into Mormon doctrine. And you're going to see that in this particular film. At this time, of course, BYU is, of course, a private institution. But even private institutions, if they get any type of federal funding whatsoever, then they have to follow federal law. If you want to run a private institution and take no handouts whatsoever from the federal government, then you can do anything that's not against the law. But if you take handouts from the feds, the Department of Education, and the Department of Treasury, and other federal institutions are going to tell you that you need to conform to certain standards, both within Title IX and in many other federal codes. And you're going to see a very disingenuous statement in this film about halfway through, which is where the church claims that it doesn't take any quote unquote handouts from the federal government. And that's really a disingenuous statement. The BYU is getting all kinds of federal handouts. Not, if you don't want to call them handouts, but federal grants and other payments from the federal government during this time. Now, you will also see that Brigham Young University, even though other universities are on the quote unquote warpath and having a significant amount of protests, BYU is undisturbed. And I'm reading here from the actual official description of this video, which I believe was released with the video itself. BYU has never really had any serious demonstrations of any kind. There are no hippies on BYU campus. And one of the reasons that there were no hippies on BYU campus is because Ernest Wilkinson, who is the president of BYU from about 1960 until I believe 1979 or so, he had a very dim view of hippies, surfers, go-go girls, and things of that nature. And homosexuals, he was incredibly regressive and he would expel them off of campus. And that's why everyone has to be dressed up to go to class, is even during this time frame, women were not allowed slacks. It wasn't until the administration of Dallin Oaks until women were allowed to have slacks, but not pants. You couldn't wear jeans if you were a woman. And you couldn't have sandals on campus. That's there's many other very regressive dress code, very minutia. It's all very controlling. BYU is really the church's flagship as far as if you want to see what would happen if the church had more power. If the church, which of course the church's ultimate desire is to be a theocracy and to rule this world from Jackson County, Missouri, with the help of Jehovah of the Old Testament and Jesus of the New. And if you want to see what the vision for that would be, you need to look no further than the BYU campuses, because that's where the church has the most amount of control over its students. And you will see in this particular video that the church has that vice grip over the student population. And it's a high demand and high control situation. There's rules, of course, at BYU against drinking not only alcohol, but tea and coffee. And it wasn't until even in the last year until BYU Idaho, for instance, started serving caffeinated beverages on campus. I mean, 2024. And of course, beards are a rarity at this time. So it's very interesting because it wasn't until the administration of Harold B. Lee in which the beards were actually cracked down on. This is 1969. And to my knowledge, the BYU so-called honor code did not forbid beards among men until Harold B. Lee's administration, which I believe was 1973. Harold B. Lee was very anti-beard. If you go back and look at my Mormon movie reviews of the LDS Temple Endowment movie, you'll see that in the 1960s, there was a couple of versions of the LDS Temple movie that were shot, and they included actors with beards. Harold B. Lee got rid of those things. So it's interesting. You see Mormon prophets who are the presidents of the board of trustees of BYU. You will see them come in with their capricious dictates, just like President Nelson, who declared war on the word Mormon. And by the way, if you want to join this particular program, you can see the link in the description there, and you can interact with me. I'm willing to take all takers, all of the haters. I'd really like to talk about anything that is Mormon related, and you can bring your A game. Happy to talk to you. Now, like I said, there's no smoking on campus because that's against the word of wisdom as well. There's rules against almost everything. There's no flag burning on BYU campus at this time, even though you saw that in other colleges and universities across the United States. That did not happen at BYU. If you did that, you would have been expelled instantly. Even though the burning of the flag is considered, most people consider that to be disrespectful, I believe that it is an expression of your First Amendment rights, and it should not be against the law. So elsewhere they burn, there's another reason that the church put out this movie, and that's because of the ROTC program at this time, which had just been instituted. At least the Army ROTC portion of BYU had just been stood up. And I believe it was the Air Force ROTC that was from 1965, but the Army ROTC was fairly new. So they wanted to highlight, the church did, its peaceful nature of its campus, its supposedly patriotic aspects of the military service of the students who become cadets through ROTC. And of course, I am a graduate of BYU's ROTC program. I am one of these stripling warriors that came out of the Wells building there. So I guess I am in a unique place to be able to offer a commentary on this particular film as somebody who has served my country in the armed forces, and also as somebody who worked either part-time or full-time for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints for 24 years. And a great deal of that time was on BYU's campus. So there's always going to be a place near and dear to my heart for BYU. I love BYU. I love Provo. I love Happy Valley. I spent so much time either as a student there. I got a couple of degrees from BYU, and then I taught there for a very long time. But you're going to see the narrative here that the church wants people to that the church wants to put forward, which is where there's no issues, there's no problems. Everyone just keeps sweet, praise, and obey. And that's really what Mormonism is all about. If you conform, if you do exactly what you're told, then and you put forth a shiny, happy exterior, then that's the persona that the church wants the entire world to see. And this is a shining example of the propaganda films of this era that the church put out. And this is from the actual quote from the movie itself. We're about to kick it off here. It says, "Here we are expanding our ROTC, and everybody stands and faces the flag when the national anthem is played mornings and evenings." And every single day on BYU campus, I believe even up until this day, there's a flag pole that is near the Smoot administration building that the ROTC mans. And they do it in the morning, and the campus comes to a stop, and then they do it in the evening, and they retire the colors there. They fold the flag up, and the campus also is supposed to come to a stop when they play the national anthem, and almost everybody on campus does that. And I was a part of that when I did ROTC. I found that to be very patriotic, and I thought it was a nice touch. My wife, who was also in ROTC at the time, often did the flag ceremonies, and she was really special at it. She was really good at it. The reason Brigham Young is different is that it's run by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, also known as the Mormons, and conforms and everyone on BYU campus, from the staff members to the faculty members to the students to even some of the visitors, really have to conform to church policies. And the federal government has given private institutions like BYU a wide latitude in um, setting up the policies and procedures that it rules its campus with, and it is done generally with an iron fist. At this particular time in 1969, over 95% of students and 99% of the faculty are Latter day Saints. And the discipline of the religion definitely affects every aspect of the university. So once again, I want to thank those of you out there in the live chat at this time. I don't see anybody writing any chats, but that's okay. This is a very important film, which I'm going to queue up for you at this time. It's about a 45-minute review, and it's about a 20-minute film because I will stop during the middle of it and give some commentary. Now, this is an old review before I had more professional microphones and professional cameras and professional lighting, but the concepts of the review are still really, really good. We will have an after show if anybody wants to talk about this film or anything that's Mormon related. We will have that after the completion of the show. So once again, all of you out there, thanks so much for stopping by, and let's click off Where No Flag Burns. Hey, Songs, thanks for dropping by. I appreciate it. We played this particular review in part at one time in a Real Talk Mormonism episode, but we haven't played the entire thing. And it's really just such an important, it's a seminal church film. Hey, Andrea, Ms. Hillis, I really appreciate you. We're going to kick this off.
Welcome, brothers and sisters, to Mormon Movie Reviews, where LDS movie lovers belong. My name is D-Days, and today is October 25th, 2022. This is episode 44, and we will be reviewing Where No Flag Burns, 1969, with a running time of 18 minutes. Your synopsis. During the nationwide campus disorders of the late 1960s and early 1970s, BYU students maintained their composure and conformed to the standards set by the church and the university rather than to those of the militants of the day. The well-dressed students in this 1969 candid photograph are what the U.S. News and Report was talking about in its January 20th, 1969 edition. It's a different kind of university here at Brigham Young, a private school with nearly 24,000 students on campus. At a time when students everywhere seem to be on the warpath, Brigham Young University is undisturbed. It has never had a serious demonstration. There are no hippies here. Everybody dresses up to go to class. Beards are a rarity, and you don't see any miniskirts. There's no smoking on campus. Rules against drinking include not only alcohol, but even tea and coffee.
Right. Miniskirts are also banned off of campus. I forgot to mention that as well.
The reason Brigham Young is different is that it was run by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, known as the Mormons, and conforms to church policies. 95% of BYU students and 99% of its faculty and staff are Mormons. The discipline of their religion affects almost every aspect of the university.
On several college campuses, subversive activity, rioting, and destruction of university property have taken place.
If you want to get in touch with me, I'm at mormonmoviereviews@gmail.com.
Law-abiding, stable Americans are concerned over the lawlessness, lack of faith in God, disintegration of family, weakening of integrity, and
Yeah, when they say disintegration of family, by the way, that's a code word for the church for talking about anti-gay behavior. They're smuggling that in.
decency that is taking place in our country today, concerned about the weakening of those principles upon which America was founded.
This looks absolutely dreadful. Yeah, those principles upon which America was founded. We really, we don't want to change any of those, right? Like codified slavery or
Right.
disenfranchisement of women, or, only wealthy white landowners could vote, or the colonization and extermination of the American Indians. We would hate to change any of those principles upon which the country was founded.
See, that's the entire point here. That's a good point, D-Vase. I'm commentating on myself here. Of course, the founding of America, this is the greatest nation that's ever been conceived of, but it's not perfect. And that's what these particular protests brought out, is the fact that we need reforms in the United States for a number of different aspects, especially in regards to the Civil Rights Act, which was just passed in 1964, and in so many other aspects. And seems to be a never-ending war in Vietnam at this particular time, in which a lot of people are rightly asking the question, what is America's responsibility for this proxy war in Vietnam? Why are we there? Why are so many people suffering and dying in this foreign war? These are righteous questions that should be asked. And the problem is that our politicians at the time were not paying attention to them, I don't think, in a significant manner. And students at universities were righteously protesting these things because it was really their friends because of the nature of the draft at this time. It was your friends on college campus. This is the ages of people who are being drafted into the military under conscription, under the selective service system. And they were being sent over to die. And there was people like Donald Trump who evidently paid off a family doctor to get out of the Vietnam War. And that's not available to a lot of these students who are at these state schools at this time. And don't forget that George W. Bush also joined the National Guard at this time in Texas for a cushy stateside assignment. So it wasn't just Trump who was getting out of his military duties. So, I mean, the reforms here that our nation needed were brought about by these protests, and they were necessary.
Looks like the Constitution here is hanging by a thread. Where
That's an old reference to the white horse prophecy here. And Andreoli, I'm sorry if I'm not saying that right. Mrs. Hillis, I got up, but it wasn't caffeinated soda was banned up to BYU campuses up until 2024. Not only was alcohol banned off of campus, but no coffee, tea, and not even caffeinated beverages until just a few months ago. And that's great songs. I love old films as well. This is one of the most important Mormon films of all time. It really is a very, very important film. And as far as your stepdad is concerned, I really appreciate his military service. Thank you so much for being a part of that. It's not just him that served, but it's everybody in the family.
those Mormon elders when you need them.
Joseph Smith said in a legendary, the so-called White Horse prophecy, that eventually the Constitution would hang by a thread, and that's only the elders of the Mormon Church that would keep this country together. So I was making a slight joke about that in case you missed it. It's kind of a legendary prophecy. Whether he actually made it or not is kind of a debatable thing, but people like Ezra Benson believe that he did, and it's even been referenced even later than that in general conferences. The football team had a Coke machine in their locker room.
Dreadful. Burning of
But
the flag.
fortunately, there are many places in this great land where the opposite is occurring,
Oh,
where
good.
the accent is upon the good, the positive.
Yeah, so this is downtown Provo, Happy Valley, USA, and that's the bottom of the screen. That's the old Brigham Young Academy, which has now been turned into a
Right.
library.
Yep.
Our story is about one of these places,
Yes.
a comparatively little-known community that comes on like a fresh breeze out of the west.
Nice.
One of America's outstanding universities sprawls on a green plateau between the Provo River and the rugged peaks of the Wasatch Range.
I just love these old movies with the showing of the old BYU campus. And it's just always, I don't know if you want to call it feeling the spirit. And I'm not saying that at all in a joking manner, but there's just a special spirit on those BYU campuses. And I kind of yearn to go back there, even though I've already talked about how regressive this movie is and about how the Wilkinson administration in particular was just so diabolical in its war against the student body and against the faculty. But looking at these old photos, you kind of want to go back in time. At least I know that sounds bad because, nobody had any rights, but there's a nostalgia that's for me in watching these films that I really like.
Founded in 1875 by the tough patriarchal man whose name it bears,
Brigham Young, he was horribly patriarchal, completely sexist, and unabashedly racist. He was a Confederate general. BYU would have been forced to change his name long ago.
Yeah, and BYU really needs to completely change the name of Brigham Young off of the university. That there is no place in our modern society in 2024 for a university that's named after someone with Brigham Young's ideals. There's absolutely no place for that. And the crazy thing is, when I was a student at BYU, I didn't even realize all of the ridiculously, horribly sexist, racist, and reprehensible teachings of Brigham Young because the church really doesn't emphasize that. And back in that time, this is really pre-internet. It was hard to get access to those type of quotes. So we had a whitewashed version of who Brigham Young was. The narration says that he was tough and patriarchal. Actually, he was a racist, a raging racist, and a homophobe to the highest degree. And we need to change Brigham Young's university's name. I would suggest something like Nephi University. I think that that would be much better.
Brigham Young University combines the traditions of the past with the learning of tomorrow.
The traditions of the past, like the evils of condoms and birth control, with the learning of tomorrow, like how evolution is actually Satan's plan. So it's kind of a 2-for-1 that we've got going there.
And also at this time, there's no interracial marriage. The church is still at this time no interracial marriage whatsoever as well. And black persons at this time cannot enter the temple and they cannot have the priesthood. This is an incredibly racist university at this time.
Producing young Americans who have deep feelings of patriotism and responsibility, who are neither unwashed nor immoral.
Unwashed, I agree. In fact, many of these BYU students have been specifically washed from the blood and sins of this generation.
Who don't seek to escape reality by fanciful trips on mind-warping drugs. Who worship.
And by the way, I don't know if I can back that up there, but that was a picture of the inside of the Smith Field House because that's where most of the campus activities took place at this time. That's down the hill, by the way, more towards the old Brigham Young Academy, because this is before the Marriott Center was built. I believe that the Marriott Center was going to be starting construction, I believe, in 1970 or 71, but this is prior to that. So the old Smith Field House, which is named after, I believe it's named after George Albert Smith Field House. There's so many Smiths in the Mormon religion, but that was a center of the student life at the time. And this is even before the Wilkinson Center was built, I believe.
God above materialism, who still believe America is worth fighting for.
From 1969, right? This Vietnam War is very strong here. They're showing a BYU ROTC cadets here. A BYU Army ROTC was founded in 1968. Just a year prior to this film, although the Air Force ROTC, it's been around on campus since the 1950s. Now,
the argument here from the narrator, I'm going to interrupt myself here, is that some people still believe that the country is worth fighting for. That's almost nobody is making that argument. Everyone believes that America is worth fighting for. The question is it worth fighting in Vietnam for American ideals? That's the question. Because there's no direct threat in Vietnam at this time toward American sovereignty or anything else. It's the so-called domino effect, which is if we let one communist country fall, then there's going to be a bunch of dominoes in South Asia and communism will rise. Well, as we came to find out, communism did prevail in Vietnam. And was there a domino effect? Not in my opinion. So it's not about being patriotic. It's about deciding where to use the military-industrial complex wisely. And I question whether our efforts in Vietnam actually accomplished those goals.
First course of instruction for the Army ROTC was in 1969 spring term with faculty and staff of 4 officers and 2 enlisted men. In its early years, the BYU Army ROTC program had the highest enrollment outside of Texas A&M University. I am a graduate of the BYU ROTC program.
And who believe that the great free enterprise system upon which this country was founded is still the best answer to the social ills that beset mankind. Visitors to BYU are startled by the clean-cut look of the student body.
Hashtag white and delightsome.
And by the
clean-cut nature of the student body, again, is because of the honor code. No long hair, almost no beards, no miniskirts, no sandals. Women have to wear dresses or long skirts. That's where you get the clean-cut nature. And this is also kind of an ode here, the idea of a clean-cut campus here with the lack of admission of Black students. You can't help but pin those two things together. You're going to see all white students across this entire film.
The pure air of Americanism that pervades the campus.
In the ASB courtyard, the American flag is raised every morning at 7:30 a.m. and lowered every evening at 5:30. The national anthem is played throughout campus, and etiquette indicates that all should stop, face, and give attention.
This is the America that can be, the hope of the future.
My wife also attended BYU ROTC, and she participated in that flag ceremony many times.
This is Brigham Young University, one of the largest private universities in the nation.
That is true. I was a student there for almost 7 years, and I taught there for many years thereafter. So I guess you've come to the right place if you want someone to review this film.
Yes, sir.
Dedicated to the concept of free enterprise, BYU has refused millions in government handouts, and yet has purposely kept its tuition rates far below the national average in order to provide education for as many as possible.
Just as long as they aren't black, gay, or trans, right? I laugh.
Now, the subsidizing of the BYUs, my understanding is that running all of the BYUs, that's the BYU Provo, BYU Hawaii, BYU Idaho, and now what is called Ensign College, but at the time there was no BYU Ensign College at this particular time, but we also have the Pathways program. It's approximately 100,000 students that the church has enrolled in church-affiliated schools. The church also has a few secondary schools as well that it maintains, approximately 10 or 15. Most of those are in the Polynesian Islands. There used to be many more of those church-run schools, like in Hamilton, New Zealand, and in many other places. But my understanding is that the church's total bill for the BYUs is approximately $1 billion. And my understanding is, and I've got to go back and look at my notes on this, is that approximately 1/3 of that is subsidized by the school, and 2/3 of it are subsidized by the students. It's somewhere approximately in that range, but the church shells out several $100 billion a year in order to subsidize the BYU education. And one of the reasons that the church does that, obviously, is that they know that people who graduate from the BYUs are far more likely to stay members of the church in the long run. So in some ways, it's an investment into the students, not only for educational purposes, but those active students will then pay tithing for the rest of their life, and the subsidy will be paid back. Let's not disabuse ourselves of the following notion. Almost nothing that the church does has a negative impact on its bottom line. Subsidizing the BYUs is good for the church in the long run because of the tithing implications.
About that, but I'm thinking about that President Wilkinson, who we're about to meet in the film here. He said, nor do we intend to admit to our campus any homosexuals. If any of you have this tendency and have not completely abandoned it, may I suggest that you leave the university immediately after this assembly. We do not want others on this campus to be contaminated by your presence. Yeah, so
Operated by the Church of...
Yeah, that's a typical example of those regressive attitudes of Ernest Wilkinson. And as far as a couple of questions from the chat, Songs of Our Own, are BYU schools cheaper than other schools? They absolutely are. The BYU's tuition assistance that it gives is significantly subsidized, and it's cheaper than almost any other school out there. Now, I'm trying to, as a matter of fact here, if we could do a slight digression here, I can present this and answer this other question that somebody posed in the chat too, kind of doing it on the fly here, but it's the nature of a live stream. BYU system here, the mission statement of Brigham Young University is to assist individuals in their quest for perfection and eternal life. This really goes back to Moses 139, which is basically, this is my work and my glory to bring to pass the eternal life and of man. Sorry, I kind of messed that up. And BYU's catchphrase is to enter to serve and go forth, enter to learn, go forth to serve. And as far as the undergraduate tuition, if we take a look at the BYU tuitions, of course, this is modern day times, but it probably wasn't very different back in 1969. The undergraduate tuition list price for these are the different BYU campuses and also Ensign College, formerly known as the BYU Business College. If we look at the BYU Provo tuition, is significantly less here, $63.04. That's very, very cheap in comparison to some of these other universities. And these aren't exactly Harvard and Yale. Like George Washington University, which is in my neck of the woods, is $62,000 a year for an undergraduate. So we're talking about a significant savings here for the students. And of course, we've come to learn that a high number of the subsidies that BYU gets from the members of the church are funneled through Canada. Canada has sent billions of dollars to the church because of various tax loopholes in Canada in order to subsidize BYU's education. And that goes to subsidize only just a few Canadian Latter-day Saint students who attend the BYUs. And that's caused a great deal of consternation up there in Canada. What the church does is obviously is very remarkable here. See if we can find the total amount of subsidy that the church gives here. Tuition, actual versus unsubsidized practice, unsubsidized prices. So tuition for current, if you're a current member of the church, you do get the tuition assistance from the BYUs. If you're not a member of the church, then you do not. So BYUs don't care about your particular residency. A lot of state schools say if you're a resident of that state, then you pay in-state tuition. And if you're not a resident, then you pay out-of-state tuition. BYU doesn't care what your state is. They only care if you're a member of the church. So the BYU tuition itself at the BYU Provo is a significant amount of subsidy here. It's a very, very generous endeavor what the church does as far as education is concerned. And the effective a 4-year scholarship per student for BYU Hawaii, wow, is very, very high because obviously the cost of living in Hawaii is very, very significant. The church subsidizes these, obviously, as you can see, to a high degree. And here is the total price tag. Like I said here, appropriated tithing to subsidize the BYU system. And this is in millions. Like I said, it was the total amount here in 2022, it was about $1 billion flat. Yeah, that's exactly what I said. $1 billion flat in tithing was allocated to subsidize the cost of BYU collegiate system. So it was a total of $1 billion. And like I said, I estimated these things they said about 100,000 students. I think I was pretty close in these. I wasn't too far off here. And this is the total income versus expenses here, the church appropriation. So here's the total price tag here. And we can see that it's a little complicated here, but a total appropriations here. It looks like this is okay. All campuses, the total amount of cost for all campuses for the last year was I'm correcting myself here. This is $2 billion to run all of the church's schools. This is 2,000 thousands. That's $2 billion. And the church is kicking in about $1 billion of that, if I am reading this right. That's the church appropriations in purple here. That's what tithing is kicking in for the BYUs, which is about 50%. Like I said, I guess my numbers were slightly off here. 50% by tithing, and then we have some endowments, we have some grants, and look how low tuition is. Well, I was a little bit off in my tuition. The tuition there is only $351 million out of $2 billion. That is an extraordinarily small amount. That's only 1/6 of the tuition subsidized by BYUs. Very interesting stuff here. I'm glad that we looked this up here. That was a good question here from Andrele. I'm having a hard time saying that. I apologize for that. So let's get back to the film, though. I really appreciate the question. Hopefully I've answered that for you, and I've educated myself along the way, which is always a good thing.
This is Christ of Latter-day Saints. The university receives financial support from the church, making this low tuition possible.
Right.
Unfortunately, however, tuition covers only about 1/3 of the amount necessary to educate each student.
Now, that might have been true at the time, and as the Widows Mite report, as we just covered, only about 1/6 of the tuition now of BYU's total expenses come from that. So it's the church subsidy has increased over time, and also the church is taking in grants, federal government assistance, and other things. And this is the way that, if you look at this is the way that registration used to be at BYU. They did it old school. I mean, this is even before the telephone system. You used to have to go in, and these were called add and drop cards, and you used to have to go in and get in line and sign up for your classes. And then eventually they went to a phone-in system where certain upperclassmen were given the ability to register first, and then lowerclassmen were given the ability to register last, so that the upperclassmen would have the best choice of classes. But this is old school, where you had to wait in line, and if a class filled up, well, then you were out of luck. And then obviously, eventually, they went to an totally online system. Oh no, sorry about that. Where are we at? About right here
in the film here. He said, nor do we intend to.
And this is an example. Ernest Wilkinson was a lawyer, and he really had a iron fist. He ruled the campus with authoritarian tendencies. Once his patron, basically, which is David O. McKay, he was under McKay. McKay really liked him. But as soon as David O. McKay died in 1970, Harold B. Lee was not a big fan of Ernest Wilkinson, and he kicked him out of the university.
Latter-day Saints. The university receives financial support from the church, making this low tuition possible. Unfortunately, however, tuition covers only about 1/3 of the amount necessary to educate each student. and thus the university must develop sources of additional funds.
I think he's specifically here referring to tithing. Looking at this from a 2020 lens, Canada is one of the few countries that requires all charities and religious organizations to have full disclosure of their finances. And we've come to find out from various Canadian reports in this last year that a huge portion of the Canadian tithes actually go to BYU. I don't know if that's for tax purposes or what the reason behind that is, but yes, BYU is heavily subsidized by tithing, and specifically Canadian tithing. I don't know if that was the case during this particular time frame, but it is now.
Right, and if we take a look at that particular article here, we can definitely see that. If I can, I have to. Oh shoot, I'm having a hard time with my share screen here. A little bit of bush league here. But if we take a look here, we can see once again the church's subsidy from Canada investigation. This was just a couple of years ago in 2022. This all came out. Thanks to basically a whistleblower here, an investigation exposes a tax-free money pipeline from the earliest church in Canada to BYU, and this was a significant surprise. By the way, this is the Cardston, Alberta temple, which is one of the church's first temples, really. Approximately, I think it was the 10th completed temple. And of course, this temple does not have a spire. But, the church expanded into Cardston, Alberta. One of the reasons that it had a significant population there was to get around the polygamy laws, and they thought that they could send saints to Canada in order to practice polygamy. But this particular investigation here, this is a probe here, and this is a very, very interesting video here. It's called The Fifth Estate, which is basically the 60 Minutes of Canada. We covered this on the Mormon News Roundup, by the way, which is every Sunday night at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Hey, it's great to see you there, Carrie. Nice to see you back here, Professor. Really appreciate it. When it comes to money, there's no crime too grievous for the church to embrace. When it comes to avoiding paying taxes, there is almost no length to which the church will not go to. And when it comes to obfuscating the church's wealth, they will go to virtually any length to accomplish that goal. But this was an interesting broadcast that we looked at last year, and this was from investigative journalist Mark Kelly, and it was a probe into the finances of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, reveals just how much money the church has moved out of Canada tax-free to Brigham Young University. So Canada is one of those places that they take a very dim view of religion. It's mostly a secular society. And in order to gain those tax exempts, in order to skirt taxes, the church moved all that money out of Canada instead of using it for Canadian charity or to help Canadians who are hungry or sick or homeless or anything else. They funneled it all to BYU. And this is over a $1 billion of Canadian dollars has been sent to the Canadian church by this investigative journalist over the course of, I want to say it was about 20 years. The Canadian church was sending about 70% of its tithing, $100 million in that year alone to BYU. So instead of doing something to help Canadians, the church was just taking that money straight from Canada and sending it to BYU because of a particular loophole that the church had. And this is, you get a tax benefit when you make a donation to the church. This is the problem here, is that Canadian saints and the Canadian government is looking at the Mormon church in Canada and saying, okay, you have a tax exempt status here because we assume that when you take money in, that you're going to do something to help other people with it. Well, that's not what happened in Canada at all. And it's also, as Carrie pointed out, not what happened in Australia. A lot of times what the church does is it takes that money from those particular countries and it just funnels it back to church headquarters. And I happen to know for a fact here that in North America, there was a study that was put out into a journal that the average North American or average U.S. congregation takes in about $215,000 in tithing per year per congregation. And this is a shocking number here, but only $15,000 of that remains at the local congregation out of $215,000. The other $200,000 goes back to church headquarters. 90% of the money is just gone. And that's what this particular article boils. The Canadian government is not happy about it because there's only 1,400 Canadians going to BYU. It's a very small amount of the student body. And yet they're getting millions and millions and millions of dollars in tax subsidies here. The federal treasury in Australia was losing hundreds of millions of dollars because of the church's shell games here. And this is obviously a loophole that the church tries to take advantage of. And the church takes advantage of every loophole that it possibly can that are legal, and even some which are straining credibility here, which are really, it comes down to maybe breaking the law. So
Here's our
That's a
first look there
Yeah,
at
here we go. Sorry, you saw a sneak peek of a video that I'm working on there, but let's continue back with the film here, Where No Flag Burns. Appreciate all of you being here tonight.
Ernest Wilkinson. He was a president of BYU for 2 decades. He was replaced by Dallin H. Oaks in 1971. And during his presidency, the student body increased 6 times to over 25,000 students. The number of colleges at the university increased from 5 to 13. The number of faculty members, I think, it increased from somewhere around 800 to, I want to say, around 3,200. Not exactly sure about that. Yes, he was an academic administrator, lawyer, and prominent figure. Yep, go figure. He's a lawyer. The church loves to put the lawyers into these high positions, right?
One plan that is proving remarkably successful and rewarding, both to the university and to the donor, is the Deferred Gift Program, a plan whereby the donor invests cash, securities, or real estate in the university and receives in return a lifetime income.
Okay, yeah, and I kind of forgot that the church had put this into this particular video. And this is going to be shown mostly to Latter-day Saints. That's who's going to watch the video. So it's not just a feel-good video that the church puts out about how how holy the BYU campus is, how inspired all of the instruction is, how everyone there is white and delightsome, and about how everyone there is patriotic, and there's no black people, and everybody has a clean-cut hairdo, and there's no fat people or any persons with disabilities or whatever else. Everybody there looks like a 1950s IBM Mormon. They're not just going to show that video to people. What they're going to do also is they're going to show. So go back to the first of the video. There's chaos. There's anti-God communists out there. There's people who don't believe in the traditional family. There's all these evils in the world. And BYU is keeping all of that at bay. And now this is where it comes in here. This is your opportunity to help BYU keep these students on the straight and narrow. And they're going to ask members for donations. Church, whenever they show you a video, there's always an ulterior motive behind it. And 9 times out of 10, it's about getting more money from the members. Tithing is never enough. They're going to show a couple of different vehicles whereby members of the church can not only just pay tithing, which is 10% of generally of their gross income, not only fast offerings, which are on top of that, but also additional ways to give money to the church. There is no end to the church's insatiable desire for income from its members, from additional donations. It's never ending here. Wilkinson used to dress up as Cosmo in the football games. That's very nice. Yeah, everyone there, as you said, Carrie, is white and delightsome. That's an absolute fact here. Whenever the church talks, there's an ulterior motive. There certainly is. And for this particular video, it's about getting money from the members. So let's continue on here.
For himself and his wife.
And his wife, or wives. I mean, this is BYU. This is BYU, right?
Plus substantial tax benefits.
That is highly appreciated in value for us to look at.
May I ask a question there, Rex, in connection with this real estate? Are we talking about...
But let's be a bit more specific. Let's take the true case of Willard Wright.
If we back up into that last scene, you will see that every single one of those senior church administrators at BYU is a white male who drinks the Kool-Aid in his 50s or 60s. There's no women, even at BYU, who will make any decision whatsoever that has any consequence. All of the deans, all of the directors, all of the provosts, all of the vice presidents, all of the presidents, they're all men from top to bottom, even though there's no reason that there couldn't be a woman in these positions. They're not ecclesiastical offices. But even at this time, 1969, I believe that the church hired its first female faculty member in 1970, not just black, but female faculty member. I mean, that is so behind the times. That's not just a generation behind the time. That's absolutely embarrassing. And quite frankly, when you look at these type of videos, and when I think about BYU's incredibly racist, homophobic, and sexist history, it's embarrassing that I've got a couple of degrees from the institution. And I worry sometimes when I bring it up with people that they're going to know BYU's history. Luckily for me, I guess, and luckily for a lot of the rest of us, people don't know BYU's racist history as well as we do now, thanks to people like Matt Harris, who I could, by the way, listen to for any period of time. Now we're going to talk about how this farmer here, this hardworking milk farmer here in Idaho, of course, he's a faithful member of the church who's probably given tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of dollars to the church. But that's not nearly enough. They were going to send a church representative to his house to ask him to give even more money to Mormon Inc. And this really goes back to the promises that people make in the temple. The law of consecration, which says that you agree in the temple to sacrifice your entire, all of which the Lord has blessed you, or with which he may bless you, to the building up of the kingdom of God on earth, to the establishment of Zion, and to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So all of these people on this campus, the faculty members, the students, there's almost no non-Mormons at all who are involved with this film. And this milk guy that we're going to see here in a second here, all of them promise to give it all away. So when the church sends a representative to their door or to their farm and says, hey, knock, 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 remember that covenant that you made? It's time to make another donation. There's a significant amount of coercion that's associated with that, even though it is technically still a free will offering. And we're going to see that in this particular film. Oh, man, I keep bumping things.
Story is about
shoot. I keep bumping it. I gotta watch what I'm doing here.
Lifetime income for himself and his wife.
And his wife, or wives. I mean, this is BYU. This is BYU, right?
Plus substantial tax benefits.
That is highly appreciated in value for us to look at.
May I ask a question there, Rex, in connection with this real estate? Are we talking
But
about...
let's be a bit more specific. Let's take the true case of Willard Wright, Idaho dairy farmer. Here's a man who has worked hard all his life. His hands are calloused from milking hundreds of cows long before milking machines were invented. His wife, Ella, has worked right alongside Willard, helping to build a modern, successful dairy business, which now, as they enter their early 70s, has a net asset value of approximately $300,000. But now, Willard and Ella are tired. They'd like to spend their remaining years free from the responsibility of the ever-present necessity of milking a large number of cows night and morning. But how?
No, I don't know much about farming. I'm just a Mormon movie review critic. But maybe you just hire out some help, hire a manager. You know, you become the owner, the manager takes over, you hire some help, you turn it over to someone else. You're still generating income from it, but I don't. Seems kind of simple to me. I may be ignorant of farming though.
Yeah, and that's the thing here is that the church is trying to put out some kind of a massive problem that this particular farmer has. And as you're going to see, as I demonstrate, I don't think that the problem is as big as the church wants to make it out to be. They're going to say that, you know, this man built a farm up from the ground up, and now it's worth approximately $300,000, which in today's money would probably be worth a couple of $1 million in today's money. But that he's going to have to face significant capital gains and other problems with taxes when he sells his farm. But when I went back and did the research, and I'm not an accountant and I'm not a lawyer, but it seems like the church is overstating how much money that this man would actually have to pay if he were to sell his farm. And of course, he could just turn the farm over to a manager, right? He could hire it out and then he could just retire and he wouldn't have to worry about any of those taxes. But of course, the church is not going to bring any of that up.
In a way, they're trapped. If they sell their valuable property outright, the capital gain tax will take a large part of their hard-earned profit gained from a lifetime of thrift and industry.
Yeah, the church really wants to avoid anyone paying taxes, as we already discussed, with the fact that they funneled a bunch of tithing through Canada to the United States. And in fact, they ran a similar literally a shell company in Australia to avoid paying taxes. They don't like paying taxes. And this is really kind of an Ezra Benson type mentality, which is where taxation is really considered theft here. And they're also kind of pointing out that this particular farmer here would also have to pay taxes, and they seem to be poo-pooing that idea. Instead of giving the government the taxes, the church wants to take the farm, as we will find out in a moment.
I wouldn't want to see a large portion of their profits taken away to some other company. You know, I don't think that a lifetime of tithing did them any favors in that regard either, right?
A local real estate man, who also happens to be a friend of BYU, hears of their dilemma and drops by.
How convenient.
Just as the last cow is being milked.
He's a white and delightsome fella, isn't he?
Now, thank God this realtor is cisgender and white. I mean, we don't want to send the wrong message here.
around?
No, he's not around. Sorry. He's at a John Birch Society meeting. Like Elder Benson has repeatedly taught us, we got to stamp out those bastard communists. Am I right?
Yeah.
Yes,
Amen.
right out and back.
Let's go see.
Okay. Maybe not.
Hello, Willard. It's good to see you.
Welcome to the farm, Stan. It's good to see you.
Speaking of the farm, that's what I came to talk to you about. How would you like to give it to BYU?
BYU needs my farm like I need a hole in the head.
I may be an ordinary milk farmer, but I am not crazy.
Yeah, he's not crazy. Wait, Willard, you do believe in Kolob, right? Okay, just checking.
Yeah, he's not. Let me get this straight, Willard. You're not crazy, but you believe in talking donkeys. You believe in people who were swallowed by a fish for 3 days. You believe in a young Earth creation of 6,000-year-old Earth. You believe in a Garden of Eden. You believe in transoceanic submarines in 2000 BC. You believe in glowing rocks. You believe in rocks and hats. And you believe that Jesus visited America. And you believe all of this without any evidence whatsoever, but you're not crazy? Willard, come on, bro. Come on, Willard. Come on.
This is going to be one of the most interesting things you've ever heard.
On the way to the house, the simple plan unfolds.
How did you know that I was tired of keeping this place and afraid to sell it?
Yeah, how did he know anyway? It's called the spirit of discernment, Willard. It's that same spirit in which the leaders of the church knew that Mark Hoffman wanted to sell valuable papers. It's that same spirit that has helped the realtor come to you. It's called the spirit of discernment, Willard. Get a clue.
Actually, I heard about it from your nephew, Gordon.
Gordon B. Hinckley? Man, this Willard guy, he's really connected.
That's what I get for telling my troubles to relatives.
Before I'm through, you'll thank Gordon for telling me about you. You really would like to get out from under all this responsibility, right?
Oh, dear, yes. I'm sick and tired of cows of everything pertaining to them. But, Stan, we've got a bear by the tail here and daresn't let go. Elle and I have some other interests that we'd like to follow besides milking 100 cows night and morning.
He might want to serve a full-time senior mission for the church. But, he's really worried that they might get sent to Africa, and he just doesn't want to be around Negroes whose skin has been cursed by God. I mean, Stan, I'm sure you can understand where he's coming from here.
Ellen?
Now, of course, at this time, the church didn't have any missions in Africa whatsoever, so my lame jokes are pretty lame.
What would you say if I were to show you that by investing this bear by the tail, as Will calls it, by investing in BYU, you'd have a lot more security and more income than by selling the place outright?
Where have I heard counsel like that before? Sounds vaguely familiar.
You'd have time to do those things you've been wanting to do, not to mention peace of mind.
Yeah.
And the church eventually codified these efforts to reach out to Latter-day Saints to get more money and property and donations from them. And they established what is called the church philanthropy department. And that wasn't really a codified thing to my knowledge at this time, but eventually it did become a part of the official arm of the church.
Ella, you can finally dedicate more time to the eradication of that satanically inspired Equal Rights Amendment. I know how much you've been fighting against that.
Yeah, the ERA. She looks like a real ERA supporter. I'm just taking a look at that.
Peace of mind?
For getting out from under all this work and for helping in a worthy cause.
I'm glad that Stan let her speak for 3 words, and that's about the only saying that she's going to get, by the way.
BYU is one of the great universities in this country.
And you'll always have the peace of mind in knowing that BYU admits no homosexual students whatsoever. Peace of mind.
It's helping to build America, not tear it down.
Yeah, and you probably want to donate your farm sooner rather than later, because BYU has been in a lot of hot water as far as accreditation is concerned, and it's probably going to get worse. So the time is far spent here, guys.
Going back to what you said first, Stan, tell me, how does your deal beat selling outright? Now, I've been offered nearly $300,000 for my farm, and it's all clear, too.
That's just the point. Suppose you did sell it for $300,000 and your buyer gave you cash for it. You'd have a whopping capital gain tax to pay.
Yeah, so Stan is going to tell him all about how bad it's going to be if he just sells his farm and sails off into the sunset. Instead, he's going to sell him on giving everything to the church.
Now, by offering this as a gift to BYU, we can set you up on a life income retention trust that will provide an income for you and Ella as long as you both live.
Now, they call it a life income retention trust. In modern day parlance, you would just call it an annuity.
And best of all, you'll be able to continue to pay tithing to the church until your dying breath.
And here's the beautiful part. By declaring this as a gift, you receive a nice charitable contribution deduction on your income tax, which can be carried forward for 6 years if necessary. And best of all, you don't pay 1 red cent capital gain tax.
Let's have a quick discussion of the capital gains here and how it relates to these folks. First of all, what is capital gains tax? Capital gains is the amount of tax owed on the profit, that is the capital gain you make on an investment or asset when you sell it. It is calculated by subtracting the asset's original cost or the purchase price plus any expenses incurred from the final sale price. Let's talk about how much is a capital gains tax in real estate. Calculating capital gains tax in real estate can be complex. The tax rate depends on several factors. First of all, your income tax bracket, your marital status, how long you've owned the home, and if your house was your primary residence, a secondary residence, or an investment property. Now, the example that is actually in this article is actually pretty close to what we're seeing in the movie here. So note, the tax is only assessed on the profit itself. So let's say if you purchase a house 5 years ago for $150,000 and sold it today for $225,000, your profit would be $750,000. Remember, they said that the home was worth $300,000. So, I mean, this example here is somewhat close. This is a simplified example since there's also deductions that you could take that would make your capital gains tax be smaller. If your farm had a lot of expenses, you can deduct those as well, but we're not going to get into that, such as qualifying home improvements, sale closing costs that would effectively reduce your net profit. If you would need to report the home sale and potentially pay a capital gains tax on the $75,000 profit.
Now, notice that Stan, when he's explaining this to him, he doesn't explain the fact that the capital gains tax would be reduced if the farmer had a bunch of business expenses, or if he even lost money some of those years, you wouldn't have to pay as much capital gains taxes. He's not going to explain any of that to him during this particular film.
So for the tax year 2022, if you had a taxable income between $40,000 and $500,000, I know this is 2022, but this is the best I could do as a single filer or as a joint filer for about $500,000 for marital joint filing, you would pay 15% of the $75,000 or a whopping $11,000.
Yeah, so this is from the modern day tax. Let me boil this down. I don't know how well I explained it. Look, using today's tax bracket, assuming a reasonable amount of profit on this particular farm, the capital gains tax is only $11,000. And this is really when Mitt Romney ran for president. This was really brought to the fore because the capital gains tax is actually pretty small in the United States. And a lot of people have a lot of problems with that for a lot of egg-headed bankers who typically only pay those, a lot of those capital gains tax. The rate is actually pretty small. So in this particular example, which I brought out, Stan, even if he didn't have very many expenses, his capital gains tax would be awfully darn small, according to my calculations.
Okay, so this is somewhat similar to the example that we're seeing of a home worth $300,000 that it appreciated over time. We're not talking about a huge number here. Okay, it's a $300,000 home, and I don't know, maybe they're paying 20 grand in capital gains tax.
There's another advantage also. At the time of your death, the value of your farm can be deducted from your estate, which will reduce your estate taxes.
And instead of your farm going to bless your children and grandchildren, that money will go straight to BYU. And you're going to like this, to purchase new day conversion electroshock therapy equipment. And here's a picture. I mean, this equipment isn't cheap. You can just sleep really well at night knowing that your money is going towards really helping these gay BYU students, one inspired shock at a time.
That is an absolutely brutal take. Oh my gosh, that is absolutely disgusting thinking about that. So the whole point of the video is you sign over your farm to the church now and you're given an annuity. Every single year the church will give you, they'll calculate what it's going to be. They'll calculate how long it is that you're going to live. Let's say that they will say that, let's say the farm's worth $300,000 and they calculate that these particular family is going to live for another 30 years. They won't give them $10,000 a year until they'll die. They'll give them like $8,000 so that the church will probably come out ahead of it unless this farmer lives to be an incredibly old age. And as far as the money going to BYU, this particular video shows what BYU does with some of its money. Unfortunately, they shock gay students. And as we found out from the Mormonish podcast recently, straight students as well. I mean, there's a lot of things that BYU does that are absolutely reprehensible.
Now, come over here, Will. There's something I can show both of you. Here in summary are the benefits you will receive from such a plan. First, an income for life.
Right, that's the annuity that I talked about. Say this farmer looks like he's about 70. They'll probably calculate that he's going to live for 20 years, so he could expect maybe 7 grand a year for the rest of his life, maybe more.
You'll be free from operating the farm. No capital gain tax to pay. You'll receive a charitable contribution deduction for 6 years. You have an important savings on estate tax. And last but not least, you'll be helping a great center of learning, Brigham Young University.
I'll tell you what I'll do, Stan. I'm going down to see my lawyer tomorrow. And if this BYU plan of yours is all that you say it is, then you've made a believer out of me.
Hey, Will, forget the lawyer. Just pray about it. Moroni's promise, hashtag Moroni's promise, right?
Yeah, how come he's not praying about these important decisions?
How about you, Ella?
Let's see, you talked about estate tax, which is different than the capital gains tax. The capital gains tax is the money that, or, when the gains that you made in your capital, your home or your farm, started at one price, you bought it for this much, now it's worth this much. That's capital gains on that. But then he's also talking about the estate tax. Estate tax is who pays and how much. I actually did a bit of research on this too. When a person dies, their assets could be subject to estate taxes and inheritance taxes, depending on where they live and how much they are worth.
I already demonstrated that I didn't think the capital gains tax was very significant in this particular farm. Let's take a look at the estate tax and see if that is significant.
Typically, inheritance taxes are only in red states. While the threat of estate taxes and inheritance taxes does exist, in reality, the vast majority of estates are too small to be charged a federal estate tax. 2021, it's like $11 million. Now, I tried to look it up for this time frame here. And I actually think that the estate tax, this is from the IRS website here. This is talking about estate tax exemptions and tax rates.
So most people, when they pass on their estates, and they don't have to pay estate taxes because it's only for people who are really, really, really wealthy. $11 million in 2024. Most of the people that I know are not going to be paying any estate tax.
Now, it's $10 million today, but actually back in the time frame of this movie, it was only $60,000. So only the first $60,000 of your estate when you die would be exempted from federal taxes. Now it is much, much higher. Hardly anybody is caught up with the estate tax now. But back then, it actually is a real something actually to consider. And your initial tax rate could be 3%, but your maximum tax rate could possibly, depending upon your income there, be 77%. So it does seem like estate taxes are really a thing back then.
Willard became a believer, all right, and so did Ella. And there are many, many others all over this land. People like, well, let's take the true case of Edmund Steed. Now, Ed's an idealist. He believes in young people and in America.
And Mr. Steed has an eternal hatred for gays and communists. So this should be a really good partnership here.
Years ago, Ed took a flyer on some life insurance stock. And at the time, he didn't lay out much money, only $15,000 for 1,000 shares.
Took a flyer means he just invested it on a whim. Okay?
This same stock, which he purchased at a low base price of $15 a share, has gone up to $100 a share, for a total value of $100,000.
Okay, so he bought it for $15,000. Now it's valued at $100,000, so he's up $85,000. Are you tracking?
Yep.
Well, I'd like to sell this stuff and diversify into something else. But, George, I'm scared. You know, taxes.
Ed, what do you know about BYU?
And see, this is the other point of this video, is that not only is the church trying to solicit donations from active members like the farmer that we saw, it's trying to sell the idea of non-members like this particular New York banker right here. And they're trying to appeal to his patriotism and love of young persons to also invest in BYU's mission. This man that we're going to see here is not a member of the church, but the church wants to appeal to everyone and say, hey, everyone can donate to BYU, and you will be given several tax incentives and breaks along the way. And of course, you'll be inspiring young persons and investing in their education. And this is just a win-win-win for absolutely everyone that's involved.
Oh, BYU? It's funny that you mentioned that. I've been watching the Black Menaces on TikTok, and what I've seen is not good. Let me just say that.
BYU, well, I know they've got a good sports program. They've got a great track team this year, but...
Let's step into the back office. I think I've got something you'll be very interested in.
Yeah, I think he's going back there to show him the original salamander love letter. Good stuff.
Say the stock is worth $100,000. You paid $15,000 for it. Now, if you to sell the stock outright, you would have to pay a 25% capital gain tax. In other words, Ed, you would receive only $78,750 after paying your capital gain tax.
Right. He'd have to pay $22,000 on the 85. So he made 85. He has to pay 25% of that. So that's around $22,000. That's why we're at $78,000.
And that's also, don't forget here that there's other ways to reduce your capital gains taxes that, once again, we are not told about from this particular church accountant. It's not always a flat rate. There's other considerations that can lower your capital gains tax rate.
Is the capital gains tax. It's a levy on profits that an investor makes when an investment is sold. And that could be either a home or that could be stocks as well. Now, the long-term capital gains tax rates for 2021 and 2022 are 0, 5, 15%, or 20% of the profit, depending on the income of the filer. The income brackets are adjusted annually. So he's saying that he had to pay 25%. Now, I don't know what the rates were back in 1969 on capital gains. I don't know if they've gone up or down, but at any rate, it is safe to say that if he is paying 25% on his capital gains, then he was probably in the top bracket. So it is very, safe for me to assume that Mr. Steed, he's an extremely rich fellow. He is probably a top bracket guy.
I was afraid of that.
Ed's friend detailed the advantages of BYU's deferred gift program.
By making these securities a deferred gift to BYU, you will save $21,250 capital gain tax. You will receive $46,430 charitable contribution deduction, which may be spread over a 6-year period. Then your estate will receive a $100,000 exclusion upon your death or that of your wife. And best of all, you will both receive an income from this stock as long as you live.
Yeah.
It's another one of the annuities that the church is basically letting you have. They're running the tables on this where they calculate, once again, here's how much we think the stock is worth, or how much it actually is worth in reality. Here's how much we think that this guy is going to live to, and we're going to make sure that we gauge the amount of money that we're giving to him to be less than the total amount of the stocks. That way the church will make a profit on there, and they're trying to sell him on doing the process that he'll also be able to avoid a bunch of different taxes. That's the entire plan here. This is how the church becomes such a realist. People talk about, how did the church get all of the money? And everybody thinks that it's all just about tithing. And of course, a lot of it is about tithing, but it's all of these backdoor things from people who are not even affiliated with the church that the church engages in, that we really have no idea about the type of money that's coming in from people donating their farms, from people who are, in giving away stocks and bonds to the church. Now, my understanding is that the church no longer accepts straight stocks and bonds to it. You have to cash them out first. I don't know that for a certainty, but we see how the church became such an incredible juggernaut is by going through these processes throughout the world. Their insatiable desire for cash, real estate, is incredible.
It's possible to see what kind of a deal is actually offered here. We can't really evaluate either of these first two deals because they don't give us the number. We don't hear the annual amount that George is going to receive in his annuity. So
Right.
we can't break down this offer and see if it is a sound offer or not.
Yeah, we don't get to hear what the church's offer is. We know how much the farm was worth. It was worth $300,000. We know how much the stock's worth, $100,000. If the church was at all transparent, they would tell us how much money they offered on the annuity to these two individuals so that we could evaluate the soundness of the deal. But the church is not transparent about its finances, even in its films.
We're only just given a couple of concrete numbers about his taxes, but we're not given the yearly amount for his annuity. So can't tell you if Mr. Steed is making a wise decision or not.
Right.
But not all help from Brigham Young University comes from the West. In New York City, friends of BYU, reinforced in their allegiance by recent events at their local university, tell the BYU deferred gift story to Brent and Helen Harris. Concerned over student rioting, flag burning, and the anti-American attitudes of local professors.
Flag burning, rioting, anti-American attitudes, that sounds absolutely dreadful. Harris says instead, all these people in New York, they should be reading books sanctioned by LDS general authorities. For instance, like The Black Hammer with a foreword by the Honorable Ezra Taft Benson. That's a better plan.
Notice that the church is generally appealing to very conservative people. They're appealing to their sensibilities of these people were disturbed by the protests on their campus, and that a donation to BYU, well, that's you're being patriotic and you're upholding, let's be honest about this, the white concept of power and the heteronormative um ideals that the church espouses. That's who the church is aligning with. They don't want any money from filthy communists. They want white and delightsome conservative business people. And that's who we see consistently in this film. And they call them friends of BYU. Again, only one of the people out of the three here is actually a member of the church. This couple and the person that we saw earlier, the investor, those aren't members of the church. They want anybody and everyone to give money to Mormon Incorporated.
The Harrises, hearing about the BYU plan from their tax consultant, himself an alumnus, decide to give one of their properties to BYU. Of course, they're also interested in the tax benefits. The apartment was recently appraised at nearly $1 million, with a first mortgage of $500,000 against it. Its tax base just about equals the balance on the mortgage.
But we're talking about this entire building. This is an apartment complex because the narrator said apartments. So the tax base of a property is the assessed value of a property, the amount that you're going to need to pay every year to your state and or local municipalities and governments. So from what we're hearing, it appears that the Harrises have $500,000 in equity on the building. Now, if this property's valuation is increasing as we're told, and there's a high occupancy rate in the area as we're also told, then BYU really needs to come in with a great offer for the Harrises.
Right, $500,000 in equity in a property. That's a significant sum of money. And again, if this couple's going to live to be, I don't know, another 30 years, that's going to be a significant sum of money for the church. All three of these particular ones that we talked about here is a $300,000 farm, $100,000 in the corporate gains of the stocks, and a $500,000 for this apartment complex. The church is not appealing to mom and pop small investments. They want large investments by wealthy people.
It's located in an area of advancing real estate values with a good rate of occupancy. Well, the usual happy ending. The apartment building was turned over to BYU under a life income retention trust, with Brent and Helen receiving income from the property as long as they should live. And very important to them is the knowledge that their gift will be used as a memorial to their name to further the education of youth for many years to come.
So the Harrises, if they give this property to BYU, they will do so in a trust. BYU then owns the property and executes the terms of the trust. And of course, that means that when the Harrises die, they're not going to pass on this property to their children or anyone else. This property will be owned by BYU.
Listen to the words of Paul Harvey, noted news analyst and commentator, about his visit to the campus.
Now, this is by the way, the view that we're looking here is the north side of the administration building where Ernest Wilkinson would hang out. So this is where the VIPs get to park and hang out and rub shoulders with Mormon elites. So now we're going to transition. We had the first part of this film, which is talking about all of the benefits of giving away as much money as you possibly have to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And there's no discussion in any of these three vignettes here about, well, what about my children? You know, passing on real estate to your children is one of the most valuable ways to pass wealth on to other individuals. And this is how this is how the federal government, for instance, made the wealth gap so large in between white people and black people. They made it very, very difficult for black persons in this time frame to qualify for federal loans for real estate. And so a lot of those black people in the United States, they continue to rent instead of own property. When you don't pass down your real estate to your children as an inheritance, then you don't build up a generational wealth within your family. And there's no discussion here about any of these people saying, well, what about my kids? Church doesn't care about their kids. They only care about the money.
I don't know what I'd expected. This invitation had been routinely accepted. I welcomed an opportunity to assist any campus effort to accentuate the positive.
Paul Harvey, he came to BYU as a nationally noted columnist. and a radio commentator. And he was greeted by the student body president here, Paul Gilbert, when he came to campus to speak at the Freedom Festival, sponsored by BYU students on December 7th, 1967. And that's also Pearl Harbor Day. Now, this was done in the George Albert Smith Fieldhouse. Now, viewing the thousands of students who had gathered for the reaffirmation of their patriotism, Harvey said, "This is what I call a demonstration." And reporting on BYU in his broadcast the next day, he said, "These days, many young eyes are prematurely old from countless compromises with conscience."
But perhaps it was the subtle dynamism, the contagious enthusiasm of my escorts which began to take hold of this travel-weary reporter.
I love Paul Harvey's narration. It's so exciting. It's so dynamic. And you can see his broadcast voice here is just so pure. And you can't help but get excited by Paul Harvey. I do enjoy a Paul Harvey story. He appeals to, let's just be honest, to the cisgender white Mormon male that's deep inside of me. And I do find resonance with him. And I do find him to be very funny as well. I'm a big Paul Harvey fan, even though we're going to see in this particular film here that, of course, he preaches a very regressive message.
Eager, handsome young face mirrored a sort of sublime assurance. These days, many young eyes are prematurely old from countless compromises with conscience.
Yes, many compromises with conscience, but BYU never compromises, even if it loses accreditation. Not going to compromise.
But the young lads and ladies of BYU have that enviable head start which derives from discipline, dedication, consecration.
Yes.
Head start. Is this just not literally the definition of white privilege? That these BYU students start with a head start? I'm just asking. I'm not an expert on it, but it sure sounds like white privilege to me.
For that campus, literally and figuratively, is built on rock. Brigham Young U, Mormon church related, accepts no federal handouts, and so the prerogatives of administration remain entirely with the university's administrators. President Wilkinson prescribes propriety.
He was extremely interested, for instance, in monitoring BYU faculty tithing payments. Not only that, but whether people attended church. He really delved very deeply into the personal lives of not only his students, but also the faculty members, by asking Salt Lake City for a list of all the faculty members and how much tithing they paid, and then comparing it against their salaries. He could determine if they were a full tithe payer or not. I don't know how to say it another way. He was a very intrusive president.
And practices it. The code of conduct to which every prospective faculty member and student must agree states very specifically those things which the school stands for.
And he's talking about the BYU honor code here. Wilkinson, he derided specifically go-go girls and pseudo-sophisticated friends and surfers. And
what's wrong with go-go girls? I'm sorry, I don't even know what a go-go girl is. And pseudo-sophisticated surfers, I don't know what these are. They sound pretty hip, though. I bet the backyard professor, that's your type of lingo, that's type of your era. But what's wrong with go-go girls? Come on, give me a break.
Announcing that women at BYU should not wear slacks in academic or administrative meetings. He tells students in the fall address, "We do not want any on our campus who are beetles, beatniks, or buzzards. We have on this campus scientists who are specialists in the control of these insects, beetles, and beatniks. Usually we use chemical or biological control measures, but often we just step on them to exterminate them. For biological specimens like students, we usually send them to the dean of students for that same kind of treatment."
Ouch. Those things it will not stand for. And those things include any kind of dope, drinking, smoking, or conduct unbecoming a Christian.
Yes, we don't want any conduct that's unbecoming of a Christian, like interracial dating,
right,
or wearing sandals to class, or being black.
Conduct unbecoming a Christian, being black. That's I'm sorry that I'm laughing at that. That's absolutely reprehensible. D-Vase, you should apologize for that. But you're right. There's no interracial dating on this campus. There's not even contraception on this campus. These are the so-called Christian ideals that Mr. Harvey is wanting us to take under consideration. Hard pass.
Rigid discipline of school-agers, some protest, causes mental problems, ranging from introversion to suicide. The contrary has been proved true at BYU.
This is an absolutely outrageous statement that has not aged well. The disciplining of gay and trans students in particular has led to mental health issues, self-harm, and suicides. The so-called disciplining of LGBTQ students at BYU has always been a problem and still is.
Yeah, Mr. Harvey talks about the perversions. This is another code word. We've heard a couple of code words in this particular film for homosexual activities. We saw it earlier, and then we also saw it here with the so-called disciplining of perverted students. That's reprehensible. Christians, excuse me, Ernest Wilkinson himself said in opening devotionals at the beginning of every single year that if there's any gay students in the assembly, and that you would all gather together as a student body, that you are to leave immediately. And again, he said that he would stamp out anybody who doesn't drink the Mormon Kool-Aid. He said he would literally send them to the dean of students where they will be squished like a bug. He has a very violent rhetoric, and that's why you can see his entire demeanor here is just he's literally a tyrant on BYU campus. And his legacy is one, as I mentioned earlier, with him asking BYU faculty members, what he would do is he would go to church headquarters, send them a note and say, send me all the tithing receipts for all these faculty members. He would get them back in. And if you weren't a full tithe payer, because he could see your salary, and then he could see how much tithing you would pay, he would call you into the office and tell you that if you don't pay a full tithe, that you'd be fired. I mean, this individual ruled by an iron fist, and he stained the campus with his presence. Just no doubt about that. Let me look at this here. And like he said, the perversion of the so-called perversion of homosexual students and the disciplining of them, that has left a pall over the BYU campus. How many students have died as a result of this type of language from Wilkinson and others? Is absolutely irresponsible.
This is in direct contrast to what Mr. Harvey has claimed.
Judged by its fruits, even judged by those clear-eyed, happy faces. The undergraduates don't flounder around trying to discover right from wrong. That's been done for them.
So when the prophet speaks, the thinking is over, right? The students have, they know what is right and wrong because it's been done for them by prophets, seers, and revelators. That's how these students can easily recognize the satanic temptations of coffee and tea and why women can't wear slacks on campus. And how they know that Black persons and American Indian skins, that they've been cursed by God. And how these students know that hiring female seminary teachers with kids is contrary to the will of heaven, so it is never done. When you abdicate your moral authority to an organization, you really hope and pray that that organization get things right. Has BYU done that?
By the trials and errors of generations past, they don't have to relearn. They are taught by precept and example.
Yeah, they're taught by precept and example, and they are expected to keep, sweet, pray, and obey. If they have the slightest stumble off of what is now known as the covenant path, they will be expelled from the school.
Oh, yeah, and then those examples and precepts are later disavowed as just merely theories. I know, Mr. Harvey. It's all very confusing. Just remember this: yesterday's prophet is today's heretic.
Good advice.
Hey, this is the BYU fight song. We're in the Smith Field House here because the Marriott Center had yet to be built for another 2 years.
Seminar, and Paul Harvey was questioned from all directions. Discerning questions, some devastating, but all polite. And
this is my favorite section of this particular film coming up, and we've only got about 5 minutes left in this film.
Even here in press conferences, as everywhere, the proceedings there began with a refreshing petition in prayer.
Yes, and that petition and prayer was offered by a white man because women couldn't pray in sacrament meetings until 1978, 9 years later, and not in general conference until 35 years after that.
And then last night, that unprecedented crowd of 15,000 jammed the gigantic field house to the rafters. 200 musicians and 1,000 voices and pageantry and an hour of Paul Harvey, and all to repledge allegiance to the world's last sweet land of liberty, and of it we sang. The spontaneity, the instant response of students and faculty to the words of a prayer or a pledge or a song. It was an evening like rededication celebrations used to be.
Paul Harvey is quite a speaker, isn't he? And I just love these beehive hairdos. Again, this was a patriotic celebration, right?
What a way to appeal to the patriotism of the people that are involved. I mean, that is absolutely moving. Paul Harvey is the best. And I absolutely love these scenes and the singing of the hymns and the saying of the prayers. It just takes me all back.
Nice. Nice.
Love it.
Americans, congratulations.
Yes, sir.
This is what I call a demonstration.
This is contrasting what we saw at the beginning of the film, where demonstrators, in particular on college campuses and really across the nation, they're demonstrating for civil rights, especially trying to end segregation, and Jim Crow laws and all the rest of that. It didn't happen at BYU. People are protesting the Equal Rights Amendment, which was absolutely squashed by the church. They want equal rights for women. That doesn't happen at BYU. They want to end the really brutal war in Vietnam. Not going to see that either. Trying to demonstrate and protest for gay rights. All of those things, they are not tolerated at BYU. They are squashed like a bug under the heel of President Wilkinson.
Now it may not make news. A handful of beatniks with dirty beards hiding terminal acne could parade up and down in front of one of your public buildings with pornographic picket signs, and Time and Life and Look in the New York Times would all be here by 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, as is All You Get Is Me.
Yeah, so those are the biggest news outlets of the day. Time Magazine, Life Magazine, and also Look Magazine, which has now basically been defunct. Look Magazine also had a very interesting interview with Joseph Fielding Smith. But yeah, all of these people, he really likes to demonize people. He really likes to lay out an us versus them mentality. There's the protesters. They're not one of us. They're beatniks. They're rednecks. They have terminal acne. These are boogeymen. And this is why Paul Harvey fits so well on the BYU campus. It's all about othering other people. It's about demonizing your opponents. It's the white and delightsome core of the BYU. It's sheep and tares, wheat and goats. This is the mentality that Paul Harvey fits very well in the BYU society, which is why he was invited back after he was initially invited once for the Freedom Festival, and then he was invited back again by the student body president. He fits very well in the 1950s cisgender, white, heteronormative culture that the church really likes to espouse.
He's quite the orator, isn't he? Oh, let's review the evils that he outlined. Beatniks, oh man, dirty, bad. Liberals, horrible. Pornography, yeah, the worst. Beards, I mean, it wasn't against the BYU Honor Code until the mid-1970s. Beards, come on, man. Even in the Temple Endowment film that was shot in 1969, the actors had beards. So Brigham Young, he had a beard. Jesus had a beard. I mean, these are some real boogeymen that he's outlining here. But the worst of all is acne. Come on, man. Acne? Now that I think about it, I think that is what Elder Packer said was one of the three great dangers of the church was acne.
You hear Governor Reagan's definition of those hippie types? Governor says he wears his hair like Tarzan, acts like Jane, and smells like Cheetah.
Notice how easily all of this political language fits in here with BYU. He's already demonized liberals. And who's he quoting? Well, at this time, President Reagan, who would become the president of the United States in, 1980, after he succeeded Jimmy Carter, he was the governor of California, and he was a very conservative, well, you could say that he was a liberal Republican in California, but all of this politics and the church just go hand in hand with white nationalistic conservatism. And I assume that this talk has been pre-approved by Wilkinson. He's not just going to let somebody go rogue here. And this really fits into the Ezra Benson Birch Society conspiracy theorist type mentality, which has permeated the church during this time.
Oh, man. He acts like Jane. Yes, we got to bash an effeminate man. Men need to be manly men. They can't be effeminate.
Right.
Says he carries a sign reading "Make love, not war," and he appears incapable of either.
That is good, though. Paul Harvey, that is good. Good stuff there.
Wilkinson was right there on the front row of this address, and Paul Harvey gives a very amusing take here. And you're going to see, in my opinion, a kind of disturbing outro here of this particular film that should give you a little bit of pause, but this is really Christian white nationalism. It's really Mormon white nationalism here that we're going to see. And look at this very weird ending to this particular film. It is very, very strange here. And of course, this is considered, by the way, we're looking down on the quad of BYU. They call it the quad because it's got 4 sides here. This is the Harris Fine Arts Center here on the right, which has also been demolished. We have the Reed Smoot building, which is the administration building. Then we have the Joseph F. Smith building right here. And nothing, by the way, should ever be named after Joseph F. Smith. He was a reprehensible person and an absolute liar. And then on the backside here, we have the former library, which is closest to us on the bottom. That library has been renovated and is now one of the largest libraries around. But yes, this is the heart of the BYU campus right here that we're looking on. And in fact, at the top of the screen, you would see the flag where the no flag burns. That's where the flag is raised and lowered every day, twice a day.
The songs are ended, the melody lingers. But it is the faces I will see in my mind's eye until I die. The beautiful faces.
The beautiful white faces.
Of young people who know where they're going because they're following an example worth following.
Wait a minute, time out there, Paul Harvey. Well, we should be following the example of Brigham Young. Paul, I don't know if you really want to go down that road, so take caution. Take caution, my friend.
And along the way, day by day, renewing, reinforcing, revitalizing their mother faith and their fatherland.
We have marching troops with the mother faith and the fatherland?
Mother faith, listen to that. The mother faith and the fatherland with marching troops in a time of war. And we've heard a significant white supremacist message. This is absolute peak cringe and some really creepy stuff.
I'm getting like either a Nazi or like a North Korean vibe here. This is a little creepy.
Paul Harvey. Good day.
Hey, what happened to the rest of the story? Paul Harvey, by the way, he came back to BYU for the commencement address in 1970. So they liked him so much for his appearance here that they invited him back. This program actually had a few alternate titles when I was researching it. When I came across a few of the alternate titles at this, instead of BYU where no flag burns, it's BYU where no gays thrive. BYU where no blacks learn.
Yeah.
Actually, one of the other titles that got thrown out was BYU where no women lead.
Right.
Or was it BYU where no dissent is tolerated?
Yep.
BYU where no progress is attempted. He talks a lot about BYU refusing handouts. Now, I could not find that information because BYU takes in, I don't know if you want to call them a handout or what, but it's a financial assistance from the federal government. I don't know when they started receiving that, but they certainly receive, all 3 BYU campuses receive a great deal of money today. So BYU Hawaii gets from Pell Grants $4 million and then other loans. BYU in total takes in just in federal student loans, Pell Grant and aid awarded to the students, $240,000 per year.
Excuse me, that's $240 million in this particular year. And we already reviewed earlier that the church's total budget for the BYUs is $2 billion. The church expends about $1 billion for the BYUs. And it takes in hundreds of millions of dollars from the federal government. And I'm almost certain that during this time frame of this film, that in contrast to what the film says, which is that the church does not take any handouts, that it does receive federal funding. And that's what we learned from Matt Harris, is that they were running afoul of government regulators because they were taking federal money, and yet they were not following federal law, specifically Title IX, with regards to the hiring of female faculty members, and also with the non-integration of significant portions of the black students, turning away so many black students from the BYU campuses. So I believe that the particular film is disingenuous about its claims about BYU refusing federal funding.
Year. And a total in BYU from all of the schools, it could be as much as $300,000 or more per year. BYU takes in a lot of federal funds nowadays. I can't say if that was the case during this film, but they certainly do now. Now, before I let you go, I want to review a couple of the comments from this film, which I think are very interesting. This is one of my favorite episodes that you have uploaded. I was bummed when it got pulled down. Thanks for posting it again. And Hard to Find Mormon Video says that it was probably flagged by the algorithms because there's potential hate speech and violence. Somebody said this is an odd mix of hilarity and absolute outrage. I can sympathize with that. And I think that the scriptwriter forgot that protest was one of the principles that this country was founded on. Now, some final thoughts here for you. the film is supposed to show the contrast between many institutions of higher education in the 1960s, in which students wanted to tear down racism, challenge white privilege and upend patriarchy, and eliminate hate for homosexuals, with BYU, where it would take another generation to even begin to address those issues, and where LGBTQ is still a huge issue. Now, thanks so much for joining me for this film review. I really appreciate that. Please like, subscribe, and leave a comment. And join us next time for another episode of the Mormon Movie Reviews, where LDS movie lovers belong, in which we will review The Bridge. So long.
So just a couple of last thoughts here. If you want to put your comments into the live chat, I really appreciate you all being out there. This is one of the most important church films. And the church put out a number of films in 1969. They put out Johnny Lingo. They put out Pioneers in Petticoats. They put out Where No Flag Burns. And they put out a number of these shorter 20 to 40-minute films. This was the church's bread and butter during this time. And in my opinion, it's because Harold B. Lee was such a film buff. He really liked these Mormon movies, and he really liked to use the BYU Motion Picture Studio, which was founded, I believe, in 1953 under the auspices of, they brought in a Disney guy to do the BYU Motion Picture Studios. And this is the type of messaging that we get. Well, let me review a couple of the comments here. Johnny Lingo, that was top-notch. Yeah, that was one of the most cringeworthy Mormon films of all time. And of course, the message here also that we get from it. So we get a couple of messages from the film, as I summarized earlier. Number one, BYU is immune from the societal influences that are tearing the fabric of our civilization apart, because the United States was founded under the principles of a regressive attitude towards homosexuals and gay persons in general, and disenfranchised them. And there was literally criminal statutes for consenting adults engaging in homosexual activities. And there's no good reason to restrict consenting adults who are engaging in any homosexual or other sexual activities at all. Well, there's no reason to do that, and therefore there's backlash. And those type of protests were common on other college campuses of the day, as people were kicking against unjust laws and discrimination against women, discrimination against Black persons, and a host of other issues. The church wouldn't allow any of these protests to take place on BYU campus, or they would expel you. There's no freedom of speech really at BYU campus. There's no freedom of thought. And I'm telling you this from a person who was a faculty member there, or I guess a better description was I was an instructor at BYU. Even though I was a faculty member at one point in time, most of my time I spent as an instructor. There's different ranks of faculty. An instructor is basically the lowest level of a faculty member that you can possibly be at BYU. And there's no academic freedom. You don't have the ability to speak your mind in any way. The expression of free thought at BYU is absolutely squashed. And that's what this film really hammers home. And that is not a virtue. That's a bug. That's a vice. We need to have the free expression of ideas in order that the right ideas will win in the long run. And if the prophet speaks and the thinking has been done, if the prophet speaks and the debate is over, the problem is what happens when the prophet's wrong, like with the race and the priesthood ban? What happens when the prophet's wrong, like with regards to Ezra Benson's bizarre anti-communist rants against Martin Luther King and opposing the Civil Rights Act? What happens when the prophet's wrong? And that's what the entire crux of Mormonism is about. And don't forget that the big thrust of this film also is all about the money and giving more donations to the church. Now, whether you give see, this is the beauty of the church's entire paradigm, is if you pass the money on to your children, and a lot of people in the 1960s and 70s, those children were a lot more likely to be active than they are today. You know, from the Mormon Leaks videos that we got back from Ryan McKnight and Ethan Dodge, the number to call in here, a backyard professor, is in the chat here. It's in the description maybe I can just put that out there. I'll just copy this in here and I'll just run it as a banner along the bottom here. scroll along the bottom. Here is the number if you want to call in right here. It's on the StreamYard link. Sorry, I kind of lost my train of thought there, but what was I talking about? Is the bridge about the operator whose son was on the train track? Yes, there's a bridge movie. I've already done the review, by the way. It's basically the trolley experiment, which has been run in a number of psychological studies out there. And the idea behind the trolley experiment here, and the church put out a film. It was not an official church film. It's a church affiliated film, which was put out by the Visual Transit Authority. But then the church would take the Visual Transit Authority's films and package them as part of the Family Home Evening supplements and would send them out as part of its official curriculum. So it wasn't an official church film, but the church adopted it. And this is under the auspices of T.C. Christensen, who's one of the most beloved filmmakers of all time. But it's a trolley problem. And it gives you an idea here of what happens if you have 5 people on a track over here, and there's 1 person on a track over here, and you've got to pull the lever to divert the 5 and kill the 1. Is that a moral thing to do? Who are you supposed to kill? If you let the track run its course, 5 people die. But if you pull the lever, then you will be actively engaged in killing another person. And there's a slight difference in between non-action and people dying, and of you deliberately taking an action to end someone's life. And the bridge film kind of explores that from a Mormon perspective, and it is one of the most cringe-worthy films of all time. It is an absolute, it's really cringy. So we will definitely cover that another time. They're free to talk so long as they parrot back to the leaders. Right. As long as you give the party line here, then you're free to say anything that you want. And this is what we found out from Nemo the Mormon and other excommunications that are taking place. I assume that Nemo the Mormon will be excommunicated. And it's not about speaking the truth, because these protesters are speaking the truth in the vast majority of what they're doing. They're saying that there's no good reason to be in Vietnam, or that gay persons should have rights just like anybody else, or that there's no reason to have a systemic discrimination against Black persons. All of these are truth tellers, but the church is not a place where the truth is valued. The only thing that's valued in the church is obedience. The first law of heaven, according to Joseph Smith, is not the truth. The first law of heaven is obedience. It's about keeping sweet, praying, and obeying. And this really was hammered home by 2 General Conferences ago by President Nelson, who echoed that same sentiment by keeping sweet and praying and obeying. He would call it thinking celestial, which means do what I tell you to do. And in fact, he demonized anyone who would seek outside of the church for sources of truth when he said, never take counsel from those who don't believe. And of course, I can't but help see the irony here in this particular film, because Paul Harvey is not a member of the church. But what the church often likes to do in the Deseret News and in its other media sources is find non-members of the church who echo certain parts of the church's ideals. And then they like to trot them out and say, look, even these people who are either popular or they're influencers or politicians, look, they agree with us on these certain principles. And they try to make that out to be something that's for us to follow. Let's review a couple of these other comments before I let you all go here. I thought that was the whole point of going to a university. That's not the point. And we covered that earlier, Richard. That's a good point here. The point of, we covered the mission statement of BYU before. The mission of BYU is to make people stay on the covenant path, is to keep people in the church. We covered that mission statement. It's not about gaining the further light and knowledge that the Father was supposed to send, because we've seen no demonstration of further light and knowledge that the Father was supposed to send. What we have are men who are claiming to give us the further light and knowledge. The purposes of the BYUs are to make it so that faithful Mormons will marry together and will stay in the church. They've seen the statistics that show that when people go to BYU and get married, as my wife and I did, that you will stay together a far greater period of time. Hey, Carrie, welcome to the Mormon News Roundup, my friend.
Hey.
What's on your mind? You're on Real Talk Mormonism, Carrie. What's on your mind?
I've got an echo.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll get back to you in a minute. Let's see if we can work that out here. And BYU is the ultimate university of babysitting. It
Wait,
absolutely
I've got it.
is.
Hold on. I'm going to there.
Yeah, I don't hear any echo. You sound great. I won't comment on your looks, but you sound great.
Thank you. Yeah, let's not comment on my looks. at all.
What Mormon things on your mind tonight here, BYP? You had a good
Well-
episode last night where you were talking about Bruce R. McConkie. What was your episode last night?
That was fun. That was an interesting one. I was raised on McConkie, so it was really, I mean, I can't say it was a shock, but it was important to me when I realized that he had actually truly, deliberately, and knowingly distorted the Bible. And who among us didn't realize that McConkie was Mr. Doctrine? And so for him to cheat with the Bible disturbed me enough. I said, you know what? I'm going to make a video on this. So, yeah.
What can you summarize? What exactly did you say here? It said Bruce R. McConkie deliberately manipulated the Bible to teach Mormon doctrine.
He cheated with what he did is he followed James Talmage in 1916, thanks to the Adam God doctrine. In a nutshell, in 1916, the first presidency came up with a systematic harmonization of Elohim as God the Father, Jesus Christ is Jehovah,
right,
and the Holy Ghost is the Holy Spirit.
Right.
It wasn't that way before 1916.
Right, exactly.
So McConkie wanted to reinforce that in his Mortal Messiah series, and all the Mortal Messiah series was just a fob off of James Talmage, Jesus the Christ, just an expansion, I should say. So when he cheated on quoting Psalm 110, I sat bolt upright because I've got it. I read the Hebrew. It does not say Elohim said to my Lord. It says the Lord said to my Lord. Jehovah is the Lord. That is, Jehovah is God the Father. My Lord, which David was saying, the Lord said to my Lord, that my Lord was Jesus in the New Testament. But the first Lord is Jehovah. McConkie said that read as Elohim, meaning God the Father said to my Lord. It doesn't say Elohim. And Elohim is not Jehovah in the Hebrew. They are different. So for McConkie to fudge like that, that's deliberate. You can't, I don't know, it's either ignorance of Hebrew or direct cheating, and I am taking the low road, and I'm going to accuse him of cheating with the Bible. So anyway.
Okay, well, let's play, since we got you on here, let's play this.
Oh,
We'll get your reaction here with Dan McClellan. The Bible. Let's check this out. The Bible passage about God's Father. Ooh, this ought to be.
Ooh, hey, this sounds good.
Yeah,
I don't think I've seen this one.
Okay.
I think one of the coolest passages in all the Bible is the one that talks about God's Father. Hey everybody, I'm Dan McClellan. I'm a scholar of the Bible and religion, and the fit for this video is Bizarro Superman. And if you look up Deuteronomy 32, 8 and 9 in the King James Version, it will say that the Most High divided up the nations according to the number of the sons of Israel. But scholars now know, based on the ancient Greek translation of this passage, as well as on a fragment from the Dead Sea Scrolls, that it originally said that Elyon, the Most High, divided up the nations according to the number of the B'nai Elohim, the children of God. And then verse 9 says, and Adonai's portion was his people. Jacob was his share of the inheritance. And so this text describes Elyon, the Most High, giving Adonai, the nation of Israel, as their inheritance. This likely distinguishes Elyon, the Most High, from Adonai, and identifies Adonai as one of the B'nai Elohim, one of the children of God. And this would fit with the broader Northwest Semitic pantheon that put the storm deity on the second tier of the pantheon among the B'nai Elohim. And Adonai is repeatedly in the Hebrew Bible represented as a storm deity. In fact, there are passages where Adonai is taking over poetry originally dedicated to Baal.
To Baal, yeah.
So what Dan is basically arguing from this passage, from my understanding, is that Yahweh, who is a storm deity in the Bible, is not even a top tier God as originally interpreted by the Hebrews, but he's a second tier God, which I find to be fascinating.
Yeah, that is really interesting. I will look into that. Yeah, because I was taking the information from Boyd Kirkland, his article, because it was just so surprising to find not a and I skipped the part where B.H. Roberts also was misinterpreting the Bible in order to get out and away from the Adam God. The Adam God just caused all kinds of problems because they were beginning to find that, I mean, they were talking about grandfather and great grandfather gods and who was what and how, and they could not, they had blatant contradictions all over the place. And I do have a huge book. I'm not supposed to take up this much time on your show, brother. This is your show, not mine. I've got a huge book, Understanding Adam God Teachings, that I am going to start making some videos from, and I will discuss the relationships more in depth. This guy, Drew Briney, oh my gosh, this guy has done decades of research on this subject. Talk about dedicated to something else. I'm telling you, I'm impressed.
It's funny that you bring that up because I've got a brand new Adam God video that I just came across today that I'm posting onto my channel. We're going to finish up with Dan McClellan, and I'm going to show you an Adam God video that should be very surprising to you, Carrie, because I'm sure you know a lot about this, but it's going to blow your mind because my friend over there at Rob, who does a lot of interesting Mormon research, he kind of blew my mind with this one. So let's finish up with Dan McClellan about the Bible passage that talks about God's Father, and then we're going to queue up a short here which talks about Adam God, and I want to get your opinion on it because it's very surprising.
For instance, in Psalm 29, we have this sevenfold praise of the voice of Adonai. But all the places it mentions, like Lebanon and Sirion and Kadesh, are places further north, the territory of the Northwest Semitic storm deity Baal, not of Adonai. And so this was likely poetry originally praising Baal that was then appropriated by Israelite scholars wanting to praise Adonai based on the same terms. Similarly, Isaiah 27:1 talks about in that day Adonai will punish Leviathan, the wriggling serpent, the twisting serpent, the dragon that lives in the sea. And portions of this are word for word quoting a much earlier Ugaritic text that praises Baal as the one who defeated Leton, the wriggling serpent, the twisting serpent, the dragon with 7 heads. And so once again,
in the book of Revelation,
the Semitic storm deity Baal is appropriated by Adonai, the God of Israel. So Adonai was likely a secondary addition to the pantheon. The original patron deity of Israel would be El. Semitic high deity. Deuteronomy 32:8 and 9 likely originally maintained the distinction of the two, and it's worked into a very old piece of poetry in Deuteronomy 32, the Song of Moses. But it seems to be even older than that poetry because it is introduced in verses 6 and 7 by saying, "Ask your fathers and they will tell you, your elders and they will say," and then we have verses 8 and 9. So this is likely even older traditions that distinguished Adonai from Elyon, who is presented in Deuteronomy 32:8 as the father of the God of Israel.
I mean, come on. What's not to love about McClellan, right? The guy is just, I love listening to his stuff because he just, and I don't agree with everything he says, sincerely. Now, he's way beyond me in the Hebrew Bible scholarship, but I'm going to catch him someday when I turn about 198 and I can finally read Hebrew as well. But McClellan just, he's got the scholarship, he's got the background, he's got the nuances, and so I love how he does. I'm green with envy. I'm jealous. I have holy envy for Dan McClellan's scholarship. When I grow up someday, I want to be just like him, except I'm going to say this and go out on a limb here. I'm not trying to get anyone to yell at BYP, but I'm hoping to be a little less rigid than he is. He's somewhat adamantine in some respects that I personally believe mars his ability to learn a better, a more complete truth and reality. He makes up his mind too soon on some issues. That's the better way to put it.
Especially,
I mean, don't we all? But
especially with regards to some social issues, when he jumps into those, oftentimes he gets into the deep end of the pool and he gets over his depth. But with regards to the endowment ceremony, you were talking about the different gods here. This goes back to from Mormonism, its design, its leaders and designs. This is from February 10th, 1854, and this is very interesting here because in the original endowment, my understanding here, Carrie, is that as we were thus dressing ourselves, a farce was being performed in the next compartment. The creation of the world, this is the original endowment here, was being enacted. And this is who we had here. We had Elohim and we had Jehovah. Michael was counseling here with Jehovah, Jesus, and Michael. So the three people in the original endowment here, the three people here, Carrie, are Jehovah, Jesus, and Michael. The original endowment had these as separate individuals, and as you mentioned,
I did not know that.
Yeah, and well, this is the best information that I have, and it wasn't until Talmage came along that he finally said, "Okay, listen, everybody, Jehovah and Jesus are the same people." But prior to that, in the endowment, it wasn't Elohim, Jehovah, and Michael; it was Jesus, Jehovah, and Michael. They were considered separate gods.
Well, and I showed on not the McConkie one, but the one previous on the in the Adam God, where Joseph Smith himself and Brigham Young and Wilford Woodruff too. I mean, it went past even Brigham Young in the prophets. Well, and John Taylor. Every one of them were big on describing Jehovah as God the Father. And you kind of go, when I saw, see, that's what made Kirtland's articles so fun. And the real cool thing is, I said it on my podcast and I'll say it here again, the Kirtland articles are available online for free. You can get those. Oh, and I've had a fan of mine, a patron, who has actually corrected something I said yesterday on my show that I was wrong on when I said Elohim himself was called Michael. And I might make a correction video. My friend was right. And so, even the BYP makes mistakes. Far be it from me to make them daily, however, I hope not. But,
Yeah, I've heard again that the original endowment either had those three, and I've also seen statements where the endowment actually had four people: Michael, Jesus, Jehovah, and Elohim. So
I have two.
The entire conception of the Mormon godhood was not established and codified until Talmage came along. He wrote Jesus the Christ, he laid it down, and everybody just went in lockstep with him. But we still have some outliers out there, as you mentioned with Bruce McConkie, and I want to play this for you here, because Bruce McConkie was considered somewhat of an outlier with regards to his interpretation of especially who we should worship. Let me play this for you to get your reaction.
He was. I know. This is awesome.
Right, and this is again from the original Mormon doctrine published in 1958 here, where Bruce McConkie says, well, we worship the Father and him only and no one else. We do not worship the Son. We do not worship the Holy Ghost. I know perfectly well what the scriptures say about it.
We worship the Father and him only and no one else. We do not worship the Son.
No!
If your religion has been around a couple hundred years, and yet you're still trying to figure out who you're supposed to worship and who you're not, that might be a problem.
Yeah, that's the entire problem here, is that Mormonism has been around for a couple hundred years, and they still can't figure out who we're supposed to worship.
And the only way to properly worship God is to understand who he is, according to Joseph Smith. But he was also known to call Jehovah the Father. This is just so fascinating because revelation in the first vision from God and his Son, I'm taking the 1838, just bear with me, still didn't straighten stuff out, did it? So what good is revelation if they still can't figure out who is who and what players are doing what?
Right, especially if you look at the lectures on faith, which go to great lengths to establish who the Godhead is. And in the lectures on faith, the Godhead only has two people in it, God the Father and Jesus. The Holy Ghost is not even part of the Godhead. And it says that the Father is a spirit in the lectures on faith.
It does, and I missed that last night. So thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, that's critical, you guys.
Right.
On a mission going to Missouri, I did have discussions on, well, wait, is God a spirit? God can't possibly have a body. And of course, in Missouri, on a mission, you can't quote the D&C, you guys. I promise. Don't quote Joseph Smith back to him. You've got to go to the Bible. So,
right. And even the Book of Mormon itself really hammers home a conception of God as a spirit, because King Lamoni, I remember, he said, do you believe in God? He said, I believe in the Great Spirit. And he said, that's who God is.
That's who God is.
God is in no way a corporeal person, an anthropomorphic idea in the Book of Mormon at all. And when it talks about, if we talk about Doctrine and Covenants, section 130, Carrie, where it says that the Father has a body of flesh and bone,
tangible body,
as tangible as man, the Son also, but not the Holy Ghost. The problem with, as we come to find out, is that the providence on that particular verse is really, really bad, and it looks like that's an interpolation by Brigham Young.
I was just going to say, it was not Joseph Smith that did that one.
Right.
Man, when I discovered that, I'm going, what else is there? I mean, how far does this go skilter off into La La Land? And it just doesn't seem to stop, man.
Okay, well, I'm going to take you out to further La La Land right now, because
you wanted to show me this. Please do. Yes.
The president, please help me. He runs a very interesting TikTok channel out there. His name is Rob, and he lives in Hawaii. I actually had him as a co-host on the Mormon News Roundup, and he has a lot of fascinating takes on Mormonism. And he's going to give you a quiz. Since you're the professor, are you ready for your quiz here, Carrie?
Ooh, yeah. Let's see how bad I really am at this.
Okay. You normally give the quizzes, but it's time to turn the tables on you. And he's going to give here
I'm gonna get schooled.
He's going to give you a quiz on the Adam God doctrine, and we'll see if you can pass his quiz here, because it's kind of surprising what he says the correct answer is.
Quiz time. Do you know which LDS leader started the Adam God doctrine, and which leader put a stop to it, declaring it false heresy?
Okay, so that before we get to the answer,
okay,
go ahead. Who started it and who stopped it? What's the answer?
Spencer Kimball stopped it. He is the one that decidedly, as a prophet, said, enough. It's done. We absolutely abhor the doctrine. It is false. Do not teach it. So I'm going to go with Spencer Kimball.
Okay, on the
stopping it.
Yeah, what about the starting?
On the start, it was obviously Emma Smith. Well, you said it. You said it was a surprise. Okay, now hold on. Started. Okay, now listen. James Bergera, John Bergera in the dialogue had that huge Adam God article where he traced the fact that Brigham Young did in fact teach the Adam God doctrine, but the speculation is that he got it from Joseph Smith, but others have said, there it is. That's the edition. Yes, sir. Thank you. But the end of that article, if I remember it right, you guys, David John Berger. Yeah, that's who it is. I said Bergera. I meant David John Berger. I'm sorry, David John. That is a hell of a great article. I love that thing. But he does say that it's very difficult to trace it back to Joseph Smith. So if this guy is saying Joseph Smith, that won't surprise me. I'm still going to go with Brigham Young. How far off?
Let's start with who put a stop to it. Do you know? In 1976, President Kimball declared it a false doctrine.
Yep.
Now, with whom did it start? All right, I tricked you. It was Joseph Smith.
Whoa, nope. Okay, now let's find out. Let's find out here, Carrie.
This is going to be so cool to see what he's got, man. Bring it on. Bring it on.
Needs to prove it.
The men who taught it and promoted it claimed they got it from Joseph.
So here's the quote here. It was Joseph's doctrine that Adam was God. This is the minutes of the meeting of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles in 1860. Okay. This is the official journal of President Brigham Young, which is, in my opinion, generally reliable. But that's not all.
Joseph misinterpreted who the Ancient of Days was, and this caused a problem.
So, yeah. So remember, this is the whole Adam on Diamond idea, is that at the Ancient of Days, at the end, Adam will call forth everyone and that he will judge all people. And Joseph Smith interpreted the Ancient of Days as Adam. But the Ancient of Days, wait a minute,
is God.
is God. And that's the whole problem that threw everything off. That's where we get the Adam God doctrine of the Ancient of Days is supposed to be God, not Adam. Okay.
Oh, I had not put that together before. Now that's, see, and I was talking to Debbie Donovan on the Mormon with Gene Judson the other night on their show. And we were talking just about this idea of the intriguing mysteries and why I actually ended up going into scholarship on stuff instead of the faith promoting stuff. And it's just stuff like this that turns me on, because all these years, I'm 63 years old, man. And this is the first time I have never put that connection together, that the Ancient of Days is Adam and Joseph Smith's view.
Right.
And that is never discussed in any ancient documents.
Right.
The reason I know is because I was good friends with John Twetness at Farms when I was an apologist. I always went down there and talked with that man. He was genius. He was brilliant with the Hebrew. And he said, I can't find anything to verify that the Ancient of Days is Adam. Everybody says it's God. Right. And I still didn't put it together.
And that's what threw off the next 100 years of Mormon theology, was Joseph Smith's erroneous claim that the Ancient of Days is God. And that's the origin of the Adam God doctrine. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, that's what I meant.
Okay.
And Brigham Young here, again, here's another quote from Brigham Young. We saw the one from 1860s from the journal entry, and here we have 1873. He says that he got this information. It's blocked out. You can't see it very well here because of the words in here, but it says that he got that from Joseph Smith. This wasn't a conception on Brigham Young's mind. And let's be quite honest here. I don't think that Brigham Young had a lot of doctrinal innovations within his soul. He wasn't an expansionist. He was somebody who tried to follow Joseph Smith's marching orders, and he didn't really go beyond the mark, except for, you could say, with the idea of blood atonement, but basically that's about it.
I concede that point. Very excellent. Yeah. I think you're spot on.
Okay, let's keep going, because there's a couple of more.
He has more? Oh my gosh. He's already convinced me.
Yeah.
It was Joseph's doctrine that Adam was God. More receipts.
Yeah, and so here is from George Q. Cannon This is in 1960. You can't see it very well. Again, it was revealed from God to Joseph to Brigham, the Adam God doctrine. This is again from Wilfred Woodruff's journal here, as quoted. He's quoting George Q. Cannon. He's saying that he got it from Joseph Smith. The Adam God doctrine originated from Joseph.
Next time someone's talking to you about the false doctrine of Adam God, please remember it came from Joseph.
Okay, so wait a minute. Was that, you're saying that it was Wilfred Woodruff in his journal who was quoting George Q. Cannon, but it's in the Wilfred Woodruff journal?
Yeah.
Man, how many LDS scholars have that journal? Now, I don't have the full journal. Isn't it a multi-volume set? I never did buy the Wilfred Woodruff journals. I bought the Clayton journals, and I bought I bought a couple of other journals, but I never did buy the Wilfred Woodruff because they made it so dadgum expensive. Yeah, I've got the journals of William E. McClellan and those guys, but if it's in Wilfred Woodruff's journal, isn't that interesting how the LDS scholars haven't mentioned that?
Well, I believe that the Joseph Smith Papers Project, now we're going to also have the Wilfred Woodruff Papers, and the church has put significant resources behind Wilfred Woodruff.
That should happen. Yeah. Cool.
And he has, and that's the thing, is it's very expensive. You know, the Joseph Smith Papers Project was originally bankrolled by Larry H. Miller, and the church helped out a lot with it. It was very expensive. You had 20 or 30 people working on it for a decade.
It's too expensive for $100 billion corporation to do.
But apparently they're going to do the same thing with the Wilfred Woodruff Papers, and that's obviously going to help out with Mormon history as well. But if you think about the Gospel Topics essays, the most controversial topics in all of Mormonism are polygamy and church finances and things like that. But guess what? There's no Gospel Topics essay whatsoever on Adam God. And Carrie, why is there no essay on this very important topic, which is a huge contradiction in Mormon theology? Why didn't the church address it?
Because, brethren, we worship the Father in the name of the Son by the power of the Holy Ghost, to quote McConkie. I don't know. That's a good point, though. Why? Why?
Why do you think? My opinion is that there is absolutely no answer at all. You can try to spin polygamy. You can try to spin the blacks in the priesthood. You can try to spin this. You can try to spin that. But we have a direct contradiction between two presidents of the church, Brigham Young and Spencer Kimball, and there is no reconciling those. And if we look at Bruce McConkie himself, he said that was one of the 7 deadly heresies of the church, and that anyone who believed that Adam was God is not worthy of salvation. So we've set up two totally different paradigms in the church that are not reconcilable. There is no spin. There's nothing you can do to solve. And this is the fundamental nature of God himself. And your prophets can't decide not only who God is, as we've talked about earlier, of who Jehovah is, who Jesus is, but who you're supposed to worship.
Even God himself isn't going to tell even his own prophets. And yet Amos 3:7, surely the Lord God doeth nothing but revealeth his secret to us. Oh, what's your name? What's the big deal about that? The sacred name is Yahweh. I get that, but who the hell is Elohim? Why would that be so secret? I don't know. I might be getting in trouble here.
Yeah, it is. You might be getting in trouble there. I got another video that I'm going to be putting out on this that I guess we could take a look at. But
hey, let's do a video together on Adam God. You want to do that?
I'm not smart enough for that, Carrie.
Oh, yes, you are.
I'm not.
Might have a spider on it. Hold on. They're saying I have a spider on my shoulder. Oh, this one. No, that's not a spider. Thanks, though, Richard. No, that's a leaf. That's a leaf. Thank you, though. But I do have pet spiders. I'm kidding. They're in the spider traps down here. Yeah.
Well, maybe I do have one video on it. I could let's see if I can cue this up for you. I haven't released this yet, but maybe I can find it here. Hold on for a second. See if I can find it. It's let me see if I can pull this up 1 second.
Says who? What about the saints of Brigham's day who are following their living prophet? And what about the endowment ceremony of their day?
Oh yeah, okay, I've got this. Let me back this up here. Here it is. Actually, we can just play this right from the beginning, and I have a treatment of this that talks about this. We'll watch this for about 3-4 minutes.
Okay.
Okay, here we go. So this is Prophet Concerns and Questions. I took what I did with this video, and I'm going to be releasing it soon here, is I took the CES letter and I took a chapter out of it, and then I turned it into a video with narration. And instead of just reading the words on the page, I actually had the prophets themselves and found the talks and the general conference addresses and put it all in as an interactive thing.
Wow.
Instead of just reading it. Look, people don't read things. People want to watch things, especially if it's the prophets themselves giving it.
You put a lot of work into this.
Yeah, actually, this video took me an insane amount of time. It was really ridiculous, but we'll just watch the
I'm
first 5 minutes
impressed already. Yeah.
The Lord will never permit me, or any other man who stands as president of the church, to lead you astray. It is not in the program. It is not in the mind of God. If I were to attempt that, the Lord would remove me out of my place.
That's an often quoted statement, and the most amusing thing about that statement is that he never claimed that that was a revelation. The first manifesto, the word revelation is not in there. He didn't say that the mind of God moved upon me or the will of the Lord was impressed upon me. And this is where we get this often repeated statement, which he is just saying literally as a man. So I don't know why people.
Well, and then the other interesting thing is the one man to give up celestial glory, the celestial law, also happens to be the man to say, oh, well, the Lord will never allow me to lead you astray. And yet, if you read in William Clayton's journals, and I have to do some videos on these, I'm not kidding, the church leaders said, regardless of what the government does, they're just people. We have the power of God. We are like Enoch of old. We'll get better men who can live the law of polygamy if these guys disown it. And that's where the fundamentalists came from.
Yeah,
they said, oh, you panty wastes. You think the government has the power to take the temple and the church property, you know? Let them have it all. We're not giving up the celestial law. That's how serious they were about polygamy. So leave it to the current prophet in that troubled era of trying to acquire statehood to come up with that very convenient idea.
See, the entire paradigm, what Joseph Smith as a restorationist church said, that I'm bringing back the ancient practices, of the Masonic temple ordinances, of polygamy, which was considered in section 132 of the Doctrine and Covenants. It says that God commanded polygamy, even though the Bible, it never says that it does. It was considered part of the restoration of all things. So if the endowment was necessary for exaltation, if the priesthood is necessary for exaltation, and if polygamy was repeatedly told as part of salvation, as part of the restoration, how come we just tossed out just one of those things and kept everything else? It really boggles the mind. And the most important thing here, Carrie, also is the 1890 Manifesto. Sandra Tanner's research demonstrated that after the Manifesto, Wilford Woodruff himself took additional wives after the Manifesto.
And he sent others. He said, listen, to the United States, okay, we acquiesce to your great power and authority. We gave it up. Hey, brethren, go down to Mexico. Go down to New Mexico. Get out of Utah, but keep practicing the celestial law. Pure hypocrisy. Now, Van Wagner, I'm going to pull a BYP on you. Sorry. It's my fault. I feel bad about that. Oh, I can't even find it now. Anyway, Van Wagner, in his book on Mormon polygamy, one of the best I've ever read, in his book on Mormon polygamy, describes how for at least 10, potentially 15 years after the Manifesto, they continued practicing polygamy until finally the government said, you know what? This is it.
Yeah, D. Michael Quinn and Van Wagner documented approximately 225 total solemnizations of marriages that took place after the Manifesto. And I have a video actually that I have out on there. If you want to learn more about that from my channel, it's called Problems in the LDS Essays on Plural Marriage, where I document and I quote Van Wagner in this particular video. In my opinion, it is the definitive plural marriage video, Mormon plural marriage video on the internet. I did it all in 1 hour and I brought the receipts. But let's continue on with this other video, which we kind of
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Let's keep going on this.
2014 General Conference, Elder M. Russell Ballard taught.
Keep the eyes of the mission on the leaders of the church. We will not and cannot lead you astray.
Yeah, right. From the 2013 LDS, Laura Grace and Priesthood Essay, we read that today, the church disavows the theories advanced in the past that black skin is a sign of divine disfavor or curse, or that it reflects unrighteous actions in a premortal life.
And this is the biggest issue here. If the Lord will not permit me to lead you astray, and as Amoroso Ballard has doubled down on it, well, the race and the priesthood doctrine, which has been disavowed, is obviously leading the members of the church astray in a core doctrine. That's a major problem.
Nice point. Yeah.
Okay, let's keep going.
13. Prophets, seers, and revelators throwing yesterday's prophets, seers, and revelators under the bus over yesterday's racist revelations and doctrines.
Okay, here we go.
President Brigham Young taught what is now known as Adam God theory. He taught that Adam is our Father and our God, and the only God with whom we have to do. Brigham not only taught this doctrine over the pulpit in conferences in 1852 and 1854, but he also introduced this doctrine as the lecture at the veil in the endowment ceremony of the temple. Brigham also published this doctrine in the Deseret News on June 18, 1873.
See, and this is what a lot of people want to say is that, well, Brigham Young made a statement or two that was just kind of off the, maybe he didn't have it quite right. No, he published it in General Conference. He published it in the Deseret News. He put it into the temple veil. I mean, he hammered this point home.
I'll tell you what, when I really discovered, I'm trying to think of what shocked me more. The day it dawned on me that we really do have the original Book of Abraham papyri. And when that came together, because all I'd done is studied the apologists, after reading Rittner and after reading my dear good friend and brother, Dan Vogel, it's here, Dan Vogel's book. I'll tell you what, hearing Adam God was the lecture at the veil. I had heard about a lecture at the veil in the endowment. I remember asking about it a long time ago. I said, they used to have You know, they used to give talks. That's what they used to give talks, typical Mormon speak at the Veil. And yet I've been through the temple 3 or 4 times and we don't have talks. Yeah, we stand there and we talk back and forth, but we don't have kind of a discussion, a talk. Right. What was that all about? And they said, oh, well, that was just more. No one really came out and said it was the Adam God. When I discovered that was the Adam God doctrine lecture at the Veil, that was a major shelf-breaking item. That was as big to me as the papyri was. And the papyri was the final nail in the coffin for me personally. But the Adam God doctrine lecture at the Veil, and now President Kimball.
Yeah, we're going to get to that.
I mean, that is as good as scripture, isn't it? Wouldn't you think that? I mean, seriously, you're giving a lecture in the holiest ritual of Mormonism at the Veil. Before you get into the celestial glory, you have to learn which God you're going to meet in the celestial room. And here he is. How can you throw that under the bus?
Yeah, and if you go back to Jesus in John chapter 17, verse 3, he said, this is life eternal, that they might know thee, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom thou hast sent. If you can't even know the nature of God, as it's been completely misinterpreted and completely disavowed and talked about in bizarre ways from not just from rogue apostles, not just from randos out there, from the president of the church, that's a huge problem. And as Doug Vincent said, Adam God is the smoking gun of prophetic fallibility.
I was just getting ready to say, look at Doug Vincent's comment.
Right. Along with the so that's the smoking gun of prophetic fallibility, which is why there's no gospel topic essay on the Adam God doctrine. The church knows that there's no defense, there's no spin, there's no nothing. It's a total and bald-faced contradiction in between major authorities of the church. That's a problem. And as you mentioned, the Book of Abraham is the smoking gun of Mormonism with regards to Joseph Smith's translational ability. He had no concept of Reformed Egyptian. So let's keep going on this.
Yeah, please.
How much unbelief exists in the minds of the Latter-day Saints in regard to one particular doctrine which I revealed to them, and which God revealed to me, namely that Adam is our Father and God? I do not know. I do not inquire. I care nothing about it. Our father Adam helped to make this earth. It was created expressly for him, and after it was made, he and his companions came here. He brought one of his wives with him, and she was called Eve, because she was the first woman upon the earth. Our father Adam is the man who stands at the gate and holds the keys of everlasting life and salvation to all his children who have or whoever will come upon the earth. I have been found fault with by the ministers of religion because I have said that they were ignorant. But I could not find any man on the earth who could tell me this, although it is one of the simplest things in the world, until I met and talked with Joseph Smith.
See?
Contrary to the teaching.
And there we have it again. Yet another statement from Brigham Young saying that it was Adam who came into the Garden of Eden. It was Adam God, and he got it from Joseph Smith. Brigham Young repeatedly cites Joseph Smith. Now, Brigham Young's credibility obviously is suspect in many ways because he would often attribute things to Joseph Smith that we know were just his pet peeves and his pet projects. So we can't definitively tie that, but we've got it in Wilford Woodruff's journal, and we've got it in some George Buchanan stuff. And it seems like, especially if we go back and look at Joseph Smith's misinterpretation of the prophecy in Daniel with regards to the Ancient of Days and attributing that to Adam instead of God, that's where this whole entire bonkers thing developed from.
That's fascinating to me. I never have put that connection together, man. That's fun.
Well, let's just say, Carrie, that I can see around corners and make you smarter free of charge. We'll just put it that way. Now, here is that clip here from Spencer Kimball, which I had to edit. Spencer Kimball talks so slowly. And of course, he had the vocal surgery that I did edit it here. But he takes the unprecedented step of rebuking a former president of the church in general conference. This is unprecedented.
And McConkie at one point did say that if you believe the Adam God doctrine, you will be damned.
Right. You're not worthy of salvation.
Yeah, that's pretty stiff.
Yeah.
Teachings of Brigham Young. Subsequent prophets and apostles have since renounced the Adam God theory as false doctrine. President Spencer W. Kimball renounced the Adam God theory in the October 1976 General Conference.
Disavowed.
I hereby disavow.
We warn you against the dissemination of doctrines which are not according to the scriptures and which are alleged to have been taught by some of the general authorities of a past generation, such, for instance, as the Adam God theory. We denounce that theory and hope that everyone will be cautioned against this and other kinds of false doctrine.
Wait a minute here. Carrie,
Yeah.
alleged to have been taught? Alleged?
Alleged? Okay, well, I mean, all right, look, let's give Brother Kimball a break. He was the living prophet at the time.
Alleged, he knows or at least he should know very well that this isn't a mere allegation. This was taught repeatedly over the pulpit, in general conference, pounded into the Deseret News, put into the Journal of Discourses, put into the Lecture of Vail. There's no allegation here, Spencer.
Well, Spencer, I like how you do that. And didn't McConkie eventually admit to Eugene England in their tit for tat, their spat? Oh, all right, Brigham Young did teach Adam God, but he was wrong. But at first, McConkie himself was denying it. Oh, I noticed you just put up his picture.
Right.
Sorry, I'm not trying to jump the gun here.
Okay. No, that goes very well in there. In the public statements, Bruce R. McConkie would say one thing, and then in private correspondence, he would say something completely different. He was a absolutely two-faced individual, and he was absolutely brutal to deal with. And here we have the unusual case here, as you obviously know, Carrie, of a junior apostle rebuking a former president of the church. How's that supposed to work? How do you explain that? Give me a break.
Well, yeah, that's kahunas.
Yeah. Well, Bruce R. McConkie had him in spades.
Along with President Spencer W. Kimball and similar statements from others, Elder Bruce R. McConkie made the following statement.
There are those who believe or say they believe that Adam is our father and our God, that he is the father of our spirits and our bodies, and that he is the one we worship.
And once again here, Carrie, there are those who say, why won't he just say the people involved? Why do they have to make these aspersions? There are those. Why not just say Brigham Young messed up? Come on, Bruce. I know you can do it.
And look who keeps the heresy alive. So is Joseph Smith and Brigham Young. And we do know that John Taylor also advocated for it. And we do know that Wilford Woodruff had. So are the first four founding prophets of Mormonism led by the devil? Because that's who keeps this hearsay alive, right?
Right. And Joseph F. Smith wasn't on board with that because by that time, Talmage had ascended in his, he hadn't written Jesus is Christ yet, but he had behind the scenes solidified the idea that it was Elohim, Jehovah, and Michael.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
Right. So that's why Joseph Smith wasn't on board with the shenanigans of previous prophets. But
right,
the devil does keep the heresy alive, according to Bruce.
The devil keeps this heresy alive, converts to cultism. It is contrary to the whole plan of salvation set forth in the scriptures.
That's a solid devil, wasn't it? Solid.
That was spectacular. Did you AI that, or did you draw that?
It's all for the kids. All for not all of us are as talented as painters as you are, Carrie. We'll just put it that way.
I use AI as much as I can. It's fabulous.
Okay, let's keep going.
Anyone who has read the book of Moses and anyone who has received the temple endowment and who yet believes the Adam God theory does not deserve to be saved.
Well, that's the problem here. You're saying we have Brigham Young, we have Bruce R. McConkie telling people that Brigham Young does not deserve to be saved, and by extension, Joseph Smith. What the heck?
Yeah, and it was the lecture at the Veil.
So
anyone who received the temple endowment knew Adam is our father and our God.
So he's citing the 1960s temple endowment as some kind of an authority, but the problem is that the temple endowment had been changed, and he should very well know that. And you can't.
He
cite
does.
that.
He did. He did.
The
days of people being able to get away with saying, well, I mean, these guys they're managers for one thing. They don't have time to learn all this. They've spent their lives in the church. They know exactly what's going on, and they are hiding it. And I know, I get it. That's a conspiracy. I've studied enough and read enough, and I talked to RFM and Rebecca Biblioteca and D-Vase on the phone behind the scenes. We know what these guys knew, and they're not fooling us anymore.
I'm nowhere near the league of those two other people that you talked about, but I appreciate
Neither
that.
am I, but it's fun talking about them anyway. So
Obviously, I don't know the first clue about any of this stuff. I mostly just learned everything from reading a Reddit post, but let's keep on going here.
Those ensnared by it reject the living prophet and close their ears to the apostles of their day.
Yeah, but what about the apostles of the saints previously? That's the problem here, Bruce.
now, and then, as I have said, and I am very sincerely serious in saying this, not in any manner sarcastic, we're not talking just Brigham Young or or say Heber C. Kimball or say Wilford Woodruff. What about the tens of thousands of saints and their testimonies and their endowment knowledge?
Right.
What about the Holy Ghost given testimonies to tens of thousands? This has led me on the charge, as it were, to say in my video several times, not as a means of blaspheming. I am trying to seriously get the logic and figure this out. If the Holy Ghost is deceiving tens of thousands of people with a devil-inspired hearsay, and the house of Christ is divided against itself, can these gentlemen really know how the Holy Ghost works? Is it really the Holy Ghost or not? Because this makes no logical sense. This makes no spiritual sense for the Holy Ghost, which is the surest kind of testimony. Were you not taught that? I was. You get your testimony from the Holy Ghost, and that sure burning in your bosom, or the strong, peaceful feeling, etc. You get that sure testimony of the Holy Ghost, and it's real, it's solid. There's your core belief. And if that's been inspired by the devil, then I can't help but think these gentlemen have never known the Holy Ghost. And therefore, what is a testimony, and does it actually have the value they impute to it? I'm just saying.
Well, this is one reason that Jeremy Reynolds in the CS letter continues to hammer home the point that yesterday's prophet is today's heretic. And if you can't trust what a prophet said by the power of the Holy Ghost and by his prophetic calling, Brigham Young specifically said that people who don't believe this can't go to heaven. That's a vital doctrine. And if you can't trust them on that, then what else can you not trust them on? And as far as Mormonism is concerned, Carrie, yes, the Holy Spirit is supposedly the testifier of all truth. But the ultimate testifier is what Jesus said in the second comforter. If you remember in John chapter 14, he said, Jesus answered and said, if a man love me, he will keep my words, and my Father will love him, and we will come unto him and make our abode with him. He that loveth me keepeth not my sayings, and the word which ye hear is not mine, but the Father which sent me. These things have I spoken unto you, being yet present with you. But the Comforter, which is the Holy Ghost, whom the Father will send in my name, he will teach you all things and bring all things to your remembrance whatsoever I have said unto you. But there's a second Comforter as well, which Joseph Smith postulated. He said, after a person has faith in Christ, repents of his sins, and is baptized for the remission of sins, and receives the Holy Ghost by the laying on of hands, which is the first Comforter, then let him continue to humble himself before God, hungering and thirsting after righteousness and living by every word of God. And then it will be his privilege to receive the other Comforter, which the Lord has promised the saints. Now, what is this other Comforter? It is no more or less than the Lord Jesus Christ himself. So the second Comforter is supposed to be the sure witness of Mormonism's truth claims.
So see, I sincerely am not trying to blaspheme here, man. It comes across as blasphemy. I get it, especially if Mormons watch this and they tough luck. They are distorting the Holy Ghost in more ways than one, then, as being one of the surest ways to have a testimony. That's not true. It's a guide to the more complete comforter, I'll say, the second comforter, to Jesus himself being with you. But it's not who in Mormonism doesn't stop once they get their Holy Ghost testimony. From then on, they're done. That's all they rely on. That's what they'll fall back on every single time.
Right. And obviously the biggest problem with the entire epistemology of Mormonism is that feelings, which is basically what the Holy Ghost is not a reliable pathway to truth. And that puts a great deal of doubt and question into person's personal testimonies. Let's finish up here with Bruce R. McConkie here, and then I'll let you go here, BYP.
Ironically, Elder McConkie's June 1980 condemnation asks you to trust him and President Kimball as today's living prophet. Further, McConkie is pointing to the endowment ceremony as a source of factual information.
We just don't know the facts.
Says who? What about the saints of Brigham's day who are following their living prophet? And what about the endowment ceremony of their day, where Adam God was being taught at the veil?
Weird, wacky stuff.
Yeah, that's basically the end of the section here in the.
Yeah, I didn't mean to jump the gun on that video. Yeah, but that was my point. For crying out loud, you are denying tens of thousands of others' testimonies. By what authority and by what right? Seriously, I get it. The doctrine contradicts your belief today and all. And see, again, you just showed me tonight something new. I'm 63 years old. I've been looking at this wonderful junk for decades of my life, and I did not get that connection of Ancient of Days with Adam. They're saying it's not scriptural. They're denying the scripture. They're denying the basis of the doctrine. By what right? By what authority? Just because it's a contradiction of today. You know what caused it? According to Boyd Kirtland, I would encourage you to read that, is because it did cause people to question and have confusion as to, okay, who is the Son, who is the Father, who is the grandfather, and who is the great-grandfather? And that became so uncomfortable because it actually somewhere along the lines, and I have not tracked this out, I'm hoping it's in this one, the 790-page book. Fantastic, or 709, I mean. But so it was because there was confusion and they were asking hard questions that the prophets couldn't do, like Joseph Smith, and just pray and get an answer right there in front of the group, which is what several sections of the Doctrine and Covenants are. Oh, hold on, Orson. You want to know where you're going to go on a mission? Hang on. Where's he going to go? Oh, he's called you to England. I mean, Joseph Smith was praying about the beasts in the book of Revelation. He was praying about the locations of where some of the brethren were supposed to go on missions. He was praying about the purchase of land. He was praying about travel. He was praying for safety. Yes. He was praying, should we use weapons to smite our enemies? How do we treat our enemies, etc.? And Jesus was there answering him if Joseph Smith is credible. And that is what became so many sections of our D&C. Why are they not getting that? And if that failed, he had the seer stone. I mean, come on, I'm not being facetious here. I'm dead serious. Oliver Cowdery claimed it was the rod, the divining rod, that spoke to him. And that was a section of the Doctrine and Covenants before they took that out. I had it in my teenage Doctrine and Covenants. And my dad made me get rid of that one when the new one came out.
Oh, I
and
wasn't aware of that.
They were talking about Oliver Cowdery's rod helping him translate the Book of Mormon. It was section 9, I believe. Some of you older folks who have that old copy looked at it. It's either 9 or 11 or something, but it was talking about the divining rod. So anyway, I don't mean to yeah, it's time for me to shut up. I took way too much time. I apologize.
Well, I appreciate
But
you
this
stopping
is
by,
fun.
Carrie. I appreciate you stopping by, Carrie. I'm glad I was able to teach you a thing or two since you've taught me so many things. I really appreciate it. We'll have to do that chess rematch here, buddy. We need to have that.
I know it. I know it. You absolutely trounced me mercilessly, and I'm afraid that I'm going to have to try to trounce you back. But man, it's going to take a boatload of work. You're good. I'm impressed. You're good.
I like to hear that you fear D-Vase. That sends a good feeling into my
I
heart,
respect D-Vase.
No,
I
you
don't,
said fear. You said
no,
fear.
I
You said
don't,
I'm afraid. You said I'm afraid.
Listen. All right, I probably did. What I meant was I respect, because I don't fear my dear and good friends. I love them. So, you know.
I appreciate you. Thanks so much, BYP. Thanks for stopping by.
My good pleasure. Thanks for letting me blather.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay. All right, folks, I really appreciate you stopping by. We're going to end on this video here that I put together here. This is a remix here of When Grandpa Comes. I think you're going to get a kick out of this one. When how do you like that thumbnail? First of all, that's a peak thumbnail. That's a hot thumbnail here. And if you remember the old primary song, When Grandpa Comes, and just in case you're not familiar with that, I'm going to play that for you, and then I'm going to play this video that we're going to take us out on here. When Grandpa Comes, this is from the children's primary hymn book, or at least the old one here. So let's see here. When Grandpa Comes, let's play this one here. Okay, so that's the old primary song here, but I kind of did a remix on this, and this is kind of an ode to Culture out there. Yes, as far as Doug Vincent is saying, yes, sir. I sent the backyard professor packing when we played a chess match, which we live streamed on an episode of the Mormon News Roundup. And I am the king of the Sons of Provo. I am the Diddlywhack Mac Mormon Daddy. I am talent on loan from Kolob, and I am undefeated as the best Mormon chess podcaster of all time, still undefeated, willing to take all challengers in good fun, though, Carrie. We do need to have a rematch on that. I really appreciate that. But so you're familiar with that old primary song. Well, I did a remix on this, which I think is really going to be something here. You guys tell me what you think of my remix here of Russell M. Nelson, When Grandpa Comes here. Let's read this real quick here. We're going to go out on this one here. What does it say? Get ready for a head-banging twist on a heartwarming classic. Join us as we unleash It's Always Fun When Grandpa Comes, reimagined in a thrilling death metal style. Dive into the chaos as we celebrate the legendary Russell Nelson with thunderous riffs and growling vocals blending nostalgia with a fierce edge. Whether you're a metalhead or just love a good time with Grandpa, this track will have you rocking out. Don't forget to like and subscribe and to share this madness. This is pretty fly here. Here we go, folks. Let's take a look at this one. This is going to be good.
Has no teeth. His breath is beyond belief. He blows his nose at supper time, giving Grandma so much grief. But that's okay, 'cause we all love him anyway. Remembers most of the Civil War, but can't remember my name. It's always fun when Grandpa comes, when Grandpa comes, hooray! Hooray! He's always been the kindest thing, and in the kindest way. He has a raging, raging smile, he's happy all the day. It's always fun for everyone when Grandpa he kicked the cat. His grandma to shut her yap. He'll rip out your arms and break your legs if you wake him from his nap. But that's alright. Love him with all our might. Tina's a rabid badger, thank goodness he can't bite. It's always fun when Grandpa comes, hooray! Hooray! He always says the kindest thing, and in the kindest way. He has a raging, raging smile, he's happy all the day. It's always fun for today. It's always fun for everyone when Grandpa comes. I say when Grandpa, yeah, when Grandpa he
Think celestial out there. Think celestial. Now that's a heartwarming rendition, don't you think, Backyard Professor? Don't you think that that really sends the right message for President Nelson there? It's always, and let's analyze the message. I'm always glad when Grandpa comes. I don't see any problem with the message whatsoever. That's a heck of a song. Let's back that up one more time, man. That's some pretty. We're gonna watch that one more time, man. And there's some. What's with the picture here? I do like a couple of the pictures in here. This is a pretty hip here. One more time here. Finest rendition that I've heard. Let's hear it.
He has no teeth.
And I photoshopped in I'll do some director's commentary here. I photoshopped in some, him with the lack of teeth. And not everybody understands who Russell Marion Nelson is, so I made sure I put that in there.
His breath is beyond belief.
And I got the mist and the bad breath there.
He blows his nose at supper time, giving Grandma so much grief.
That's flippin' nasty. And I put the Simpsons in the back there, and that's, by the way, that's Maggie throwing up all over the place. That is, Wendy, I'm in agreement with you. That is flipping nasty out there. And I do think that's a handsome pick of Russell Nelson. If I can get a thumbs up for that pick right there, I think he looks pretty good in that particular one. And Wendy also looks very handsome in that one, by the way.
But that's okay, because we all love him anyway.
Well, they definitely do have a man crush on President Nelson. I always, whenever I put him into a picture, I always make sure there's a lot of money around, since he is the richest man who has ever lived with a valuation of $300 billion.
He remembers most of the Civil War, but can't remember my name.
I do like that pic. I think I look pretty good as a nun, if I don't say so myself. I think, kind of hot. Maybe that pick with me is probably 8 out of 10. And he remembers most of the Civil War. Actually, I think President Nelson was alive during most of the Civil War, but he can't remember my name. What's your fetching name? That's a good President Nelson. My name is D-Base, man. How do you forget this stuff?
It's always fun when Grandpa comes, hooray! Hooray!
Whoa, what's with that picture? How'd that slip in there?
It's always been the kindest thing, and in the kindest way. He has a ring, smile. He's happy all the day. It's always fun for everyone when Grandpa comes.
When Grandpa comes, that's what she said. I don't know how that picture got in there, by the way. Kind of make you think of the song in a different way in the future, doesn't it? Can I get a small golf clap out there for that? I think that's pretty good there. I appreciate that he enjoys this rendition. I mean, nothing wrong with the lyrics. Everybody loves it when President Nelson comes around. I do like it that they're clapping for that.
He kicks the cat.
Do you know how hard it is to find a video of somebody kicking a cat? And I like that I put in the church news in the top right-hand corner of this one so that it looks like it's an official church video and the logo in there. It is very hard to find a picture of somebody kicking a cat. And I also put in a small sound to go along with the cat. Here, if you listen.
He kicks the cat. Tells Grandma to shut her yap.
Shut your yap, Wendy.
The cat tells Grandma to shut her yap. He'll rip out your arms and break your legs if you wake him from his nap.
Yeah, that's pretty violent. He'll rip out your arms and break your legs if you wake him from his nap. Everybody, listen, if Russell's asleep, you don't wake him up. I think everybody knows that. You can see what can happen if you do that. So just take caution if you're around him. And Doug says, my cat is offended. They're eating the cats and the dogs out there. So just be careful, Doug. I've heard that.
But that's all right. Love him with all our might.
I like this is the TBMs here. The President Nelson veneration is kind of creepy in some ways, but I pulled this clip from back in the Beatles, like 1964, when they were like singing on the Ed Sullivan Show. But that's how TBMs approach it.
mean as a rabbit badger, thank goodness he can't bite.
He's mean as a rabid badger, and I do have the rabid badger in there. This is his 100th birthday party. It's a good thing that he can't fight. If we back that up, you'll see President Nelson's reflexes. Well, guys, they're not what they used to be. Let's back that up and see that one more time.
Rabbit badger, thank goodness he can't bite.
Oh, whoops. Oh, sorry.
It's always fun when Grandpa comes, but Grandpa comes around.
Whoa, how'd that pitcher get in there again? That's irresponsible.
He always says the kindest things, and in the kindest way. He has a great smile. He's happy all the day. It's always fun for everyone when Grandpa comes.
That's what she said. Now, everybody out there, if you got your white handkerchief, you want to take it out for the last you want to take it out for this last chorus here. I've never seen a balloon injury. Yeah, you got to be careful. Hey, I don't know who put that gun in there. That's irresponsible.
It's always fun when Grandpa comes around. He always says the kindest things, and in the kindest way. He has a great smile. He's happy all the day. It's always fun for everyone when Grandpa comes.
Now, the remainder of the video I took from a Sarah Silverman music video as well, and I dubbed Russell in there just to keep an eye on things.
I sail when Grandpa, yeah, when Grandpa, he
I don't know. Why is she being so mean to Russell there? I have no idea. That's irresponsible. I just want to rebuke that. Sarah Silverman there's no cause for that kind of abuse on Russell Nelson. Just in case this gets clipped in the future, I just want everybody to know that I denounce this type of violent rhetoric. There's no cause for Sarah Silverman to treat our beloved prophet like that. He is resting. And I also, you see that somebody dubbed in here the Moroni symbol in there. I do appreciate that. So my message out there to all of you is keep thinking celestial out there. I want to thank Carrie so much for coming on. We reviewed Where No Flag Burns, which is a very important Mormon movie where we talked about the Adam God doctrine. It just kind of shows to you that I can talk about almost anything that's Mormon related. And even I can teach Carrie, the backyard professor, a thing or two, very small thing or two out there. But if you stick with the Mormon News Roundup, you will be able to see around corners and you will be able to make you smarter. Just remember, I am the Diddly Whack Mac Mormon Daddy. I am the king of the Sons of Provo. And yes, that is talent on loan from Kolob. Always think celestial. And remember, no unhallowed hand can stop this podcast from progressing. So long out there, folks.
Thank you.